Majestic Owl Publishing, LLC presents S'more Event, Book 2 from Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI Narrator. Chapter 1. Do we all have to come? Hillary asked Naomi. I'd prefer to leave someone at the shop in case we get customers. You of all people should know not to leave a store untended during business hours. Hillary had owned something special for a while now, and the gift basket shop was doing well. Apart from a small incident involving one of their baskets and a murder, they'd received only good feedback from their customers. Hillary struggled to hide her annoyance as Sticky Sweet's owner, Naomi, threw a fit. I don't think you understand how serious this is, Naomi Trundle said to Hillary as she marched ahead to Sticky Sweet. Hillary looked over her shoulder at Rose, who was walking with Annabelle. Naomi had stomped into something special that morning and insisted that all three of them go to Sticky Sweet to see the evidence. I want all of you to see this so there are no misunderstandings, she said. Witnesses and all that. Naomi specialized in chocolates but sold other treats as well. Sticky Sweet and Something Special were across the road from each other, and Hillary often referred customers to Naomi's shop, and vice versa. How irritating that these rumors about her parrot Spot were hurting their relationship. Hillary sighed. Naomi had come into Something Special before and accused Hillary's parrot Spot of stealing nuts from her. Everyone in Rosemary Harbor knew that Spot had an unparalleled affinity for unsalted almonds, but surely Hillary's late husband's parrot was not guilty of theft. Naomi was wasting her time, and she was ruining a good relationship. I will put these rumors to rest, Hillary thought, as they all marched across the street, and prove once and for all that Spot couldn't be the culprit. This had gone on long enough. Naomi had started with her nonsense about the nut-stealing parrot after Police Chief Preston Davis treated Spot with an almond for a job well done on a case. Spot had recalled a conversation, bringing vital evidence to light, and Chief Davis, knowing about Spot's love for unsalted almonds, had given the bird a treat. After that, Spot seemed to associate almonds with being a good bird, and he helped himself to the stuff whenever he felt he was doing the right thing. Often, the nuts belonged to someone else, which made him the opposite of a good bird, but not even Hillary could get the stubborn parrot to stop. Surely, though, Hillary thought, he wouldn't have gone across the street and stolen from another store. It was her late husband who had taught Spot to like unsalted almonds. When he got Spot as an eclectus chick, he had hand-reared him and taught him to speak. Now, Hillary's husband was gone, but she held on to Spot as the only link to her husband other than their daughter, though the parrot got up to all sorts of mischief. Naomi's blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail that swung back and forth as she walked. For a woman who owned a sweet shop, she was in great shape. She ran every morning and went to a Pilates class 3 times a week. It was a pity that despite her effort to take care of herself, Teddy's eyes still roamed. Hillary would never understand their marriage. She'd been deliriously happy in her own. There, Naomi said, walking into Sticky Sweet with the rest in tow. Look, do you see? They all looked where she pointed. Hillary stepped forward, kneeled down, and picked up the feather that lay on the floor. She studied it, making a big deal of looking it over, but there was no doubt about it. The feather belonged to Spot. He was the only parrot around, and there weren't birds with feathers like that flying around Rosemary Harbor. Hillary had to admit, Naomi had a good reason to think Spot had gotten into her shop. Do you see that? Naomi asked Annabelle and Rose as well. Annabelle shook her head in disbelief. She knew the moment she saw the feather that it belonged to Spot. She'd grown up with her dad's parrot. She knew about his love for almonds, and she loved the parrot dearly. But there was no doubt about it, that was Spot's feather. Which meant that he had somehow gotten into Sticky Sweet, a shop with more than enough nuts to make the bird happy. I don't understand, Hillary said. What is it you said he did? Naomi looked angrier and angrier. 10 gallons, she cried out. That blasted bird ate 10 gallons of nuts that I'd packaged for a wedding this weekend. Hillary almost burst out laughing. 10 gallons of nuts. No way Spot could have eaten that much. A human couldn't have eaten that much. But Naomi wasn't finished. And it's a destination wedding, so it's not like I can just walk up to the bride and tell her we've hit a snag. Do you know how difficult this will be for me? Hillary nodded. She knew full well as a gift shop owner what it meant when an order was messed up and what it took and cost to rectify it. But 10 gallons? Yes, Spot was infamous for his love of almonds. The complaints had been rolling in lately about the parrot snatching nuts that didn't belong to him, and Hillary knew that she would have to do something about it. But there was just no way, that Spot had consumed 10 gallons of the stuff seemingly overnight. I don't know what to say, Hillary said. I see what you're saying, and the feather is here. But it's a lot of nuts, Naomi. She tried to be diplomatic, hoping Naomi would see how ridiculous it was. You will always stand up for that damned bird, Naomi said. She was furious. Hillary had brought the bird with her when she'd moved to Rosemary Harbor from Miami almost a year ago, and since then, the bird had been nothing but a nuisance. Naomi had never been fond of birds. Why anyone would want one as a pet was beyond her, and the incessant squawking when she visited something special got on her nerves, but this had gone too far. She outright hated the beast now. Let me show you where he got in. You'll believe me then. Naomi dragged Hillary to the storage room. This is the only window I ever leave open, and even then just a crack. Do you see? And do you see how I put these locks on the window, so it can't be opened any further? You know I lock everything up tight every night. Hillary nodded. She knew that about Naomi. The woman was a perfectionist, and she never missed a step. She was never scatterbrained or forgetful. In fact, when an au pair named Carolina worked for her, Naomi was extremely hard on her to reach perfection. Carolina had complained about it to Hillary more than once. No, Naomi would never accidentally leave something open for anyone to be able to enter the store. And with that crack in the window, the only explanation was that Spot had gotten in and eaten all those nuts. No matter how impossible it seemed. Hillary ran her hand through her auburn hair and pushed it out of her face. I don't know, Naomi, she said, still hoping the woman would see reason. Your deduction is logical, but 10 gallons still seems like a lot to me. I don't think so, Rose piped up. Hillary sighed. Of course, Rose had to put in her 2 cents. She always did. Spot has stolen enough of my almonds for me to be sick of the creature. You see? Your own friend agrees, Naomi said. Rose sighed. I'm sorry, Hillary. But I'm inclined to believe Naomi. Hillary nodded. Rose was indeed a good friend of hers, a retiree who owned half the store buildings in Rosemary Harbor and rented them out. She had enough money and didn't need to work, but she spent her time at something special anyway, doing what she could to help. She had grown attached to Hillary, the woman with the sad eyes, and her daughter. She also kept her ear to the ground, which meant she knew every bit of gossip around town, and she didn't hesitate to do her part in spreading rumors. She was also opinionated, and not scared to say what she thought, which was why Hillary wasn't in the least offended that Rose sided with Naomi against her. I'm so sorry this happened, Hillary said, not knowing what else to say. We'll make sure Spot can't get out of the shop, take extra measures. I'll even take him home with me in the evenings, so that we can keep an eye on him, Annabelle offered. Spot had always been free to roam around something special, and even though her mom was right to suggest locking the bird up at night, she felt sorry for him. It was her dad's bird after all, and he'd never been locked in his cage overnight. He was a friend, not just a pet. Naomi shook her head. I'm sorry, but no. That's not good enough. This problem is becoming expensive, and I won't have it. I demand you turn that bird over to animal control. The sooner the parrot was out of her hair, the better it would be. For everyone. Hillary's eyes widened in shock. What? Oh, come on. That's a bit excessive, isn't it? Absolutely not, Naomi said. I think it's only fair. It's costing me time, money, and clients. And it's a health risk, if you ask me. No one asked you, Annabelle snapped. She wasn't giving up her father's bird for anything. Hillary put her hand on her daughter's arm. Let's not make any hasty decisions, she said to Naomi. Why don't we try keeping the bird locked up at night first, and take the next step if it comes to it? Naomi shook her head. She was unhappy with the parrot, and now Hillary was taking the bird's side over hers, a human and a friend. Just hand over the bird, and everything will be fine. I can press charges for this, you know. I'm sure there are enough people around town to testify that Spot has been a problem. We'll have a case. Let's not go that far, Rose said, chipping in. Why don't we talk about this? There's nothing to talk about. That bird is ruining my business. Now see here, Hillary said. She was getting angry. She'd been calm about it all until now, but Naomi wasn't letting it go, and Hillary wasn't giving Spot up. It was unfair of Naomi to insist that she hand him over to animal control. It's not possible for a parrot to eat 10 gallons of nuts, and I think you know that. Seriously, think about it. 10 gallons? I was willing to give you the benefit of the doubt because we're friends and we've always helped each other out, but this is ridiculous. Spot is a member of our family, and you can't expect us to give him up. It's like asking. She stopped talking and swallowed the lump in her throat that had unexpectedly formed. Asking her to give Spot up was asking her to let go of one of the only things she had left of her late husband, and that was never going to happen. My mom is right, Annabelle jumped in. She could see her mom was getting upset, and she hated seeing her cry. There had been way too much of that in their lives, and this wasn't fair at all. If you want anything to change, you'll have to approach it differently. We don't appreciate your attitude. But Naomi was beyond reason, and everyone could see it. Ladies, let's take a moment to calm down, Rose said. The situation was getting a little out of hand, but there was no arguing with Naomi, who was convinced beyond a doubt that she was right about who or what was to blame. Rose had her own doubts, of course. Spot had caused his fair share of trouble with his almond addiction, but the time Rose had spent with Annabelle and Hillary had shown her enough about how much the death of Hillary's husband had affected them. Suggesting they take the parrot away from Hillary and Annabelle struck a nerve, and she didn't want to see her friends hurt. And the more she thought about it, 10 gallons, that did seem a bit much for one small parrot to consume. No. I'm not going to calm down. This is an outrage, my name defamed by a parrot. Rose rolled her eyes. That's a bit dramatic, Naomi. It's not. Do you know what it will take to fix this? Rose shook her head, not answering. Hillary watched her daughter and her friend stand up for her in silence. Naomi was dramatic and upset, and she could understand why. A work order being ruined like that was hard to correct. She had been willing to listen, and the evidence seemed to point in a certain direction, except for the fact that it was 10 gallons of nuts that had disappeared. Which meant that someone else was to blame. Naomi, she said, interrupting the bickering that had started between the other women. Who else has a key to the shop? No one, Naomi said firmly. It's just me. I hope you're not trying to shift the blame away from your parrot. It's... Naomi paused, her eyes widening a little as a thought occurred to her. Teddy might still have his key. She had taken everything that belonged to her from her wretched husband, but she hadn't thought to take the key. She swallowed hard. Teddy has a key, she said softly. And you don't think he might have been involved? Hillary asked. It wasn't a secret that Naomi and Teddy's relationship was almost non-existent. He had messed around one too many times, and she was done. To assume that Teddy would just roll over and show his belly was almost too much. Naomi thought about it for a moment before she nodded slowly. I guess he could have come into the shop, she said. She wanted to cry now that her rage had dissipated. She felt like a fool. Tears welled in her eyes, and that made her feel horrid too. She hated showing weakness to others, and she had aggressively accused Hillary of something that might not be her fault. I think we should go, Hillary said with a nod. Enough had been said. There was no proof of anything, but at least Naomi had come to her senses a little. We have a few deliveries to take care of. Naomi nodded. Hillary, Annabelle, and Rose turned to leave Sticky Sweet. What a start to the day. Chapter 2. Hillary loaded the new van that they had acquired since things had been going so well with something special. The name of the shop and a few baskets filled with flowers and gifts had been painted on the side of the van so that the vehicle looked the part, and Hillary was proud to drive it around town. When she left the shop after making sure she had all her orders, Spot flew out with her. Coming with me? Hillary asked him. The early bird gets the worm, Spot answered, and Hillary smiled, shaking her head. It had been one of Matthew's favorite sayings, and Spot had adopted it, along with all of Matthew's other utterances. Now that her husband was gone, it was Spot who kept his memory alive. I guess it will keep you out of trouble if I know where you are. No almond thieving for you today. Spot flew into the van and perched on the seat next to Hillary, flapping his wings and squawking about a road trip. It was a good thing that he was with her on the trip now, rather than staying at something special with Annabelle and Rose. Even though they kept an eye on Spot, the bird was free to fly around as he pleased, and he could escape if he wanted to. All it took was a customer opening the door for a second, and Spot would fly out. After the spectacle with Naomi, Hillary didn't want to risk Spot getting over to Sticky Sweet and sneaking in. She wasn't sure if Spot had eaten any almonds over there, but his feather proved he had been in the shop at least once, and that was enough reason to make sure he didn't go there again. Naomi had been in such a state that morning, Hillary thought. The poor woman had been through a lot lately. Her marriage to Teddy was on the rocks. Teddy had a wandering eye and a wandering everything else, and Naomi had found out. It hadn't gone down well. Naomi had made a scene so big the whole town knew what had happened right away. Hillary didn't know where Naomi and Teddy stood now, but she was sure that the emotional atmosphere in the shop that morning had been a direct result. Naomi had been a lot more uptight than Hillary thought necessary. Then again, what if it had been her own shop that had been compromised? How would Hillary have reacted? She knew what it took to put in an order and fulfill it, and how the business worked. Maybe she would have been just as upset if the roles had been reversed. Still, blaming a parrot for 10 gallons of nuts disappearing was beyond excessive. Maybe Spot had had a bit of it, but he couldn't have eaten it all. Hillary took a deep breath and let it out slowly. It was pointless to hold on to it. She would have to wait and see if something more came of it. Halfway through her delivery route, Hillary stopped on Willis Street, got out of the van, and loaded 3 baskets into the red radio flyer wagon. It was a wagon like Girl Scouts used to sell cookies, and it made her think of the days when she was a kid and played with her dolls and won. The 3 deliveries were all on the same road, thanks to a PTA fundraiser. Spot flew out of the van and perched on Hillary's shoulder as she walked down the street, pulling the wagon behind her. A cop car bleeped, and Hillary looked up to see Police Chief Preston Davis pull up in a parking spot parallel to the curb. He had a broad smile plastered on his face as he got out. "Morning, Hillary," he said, and caught up to her with a run in his step. "Do you need some company?" "Morning, Preston," she said. "What are you up to?" She wasn't really in the mood for Preston's company today, but didn't want to be rude. "Nothing more than patrolling, and that can wait until I've escorted you." Hillary forced a smile. She didn't feel like walking with him, making small talk, flirting casually. Preston had been interested in her for a while. They had gone on a date together, and he liked to frequent her shop when he needed gifts for family members or friends. But Hillary only wanted to be friends with him, and she knew he wanted more. She wasn't ready for another relationship. Matthew had passed away a while ago now, but replacing her husband was unthinkable. Since Naomi had insisted that Spot should be taken away by animal control, Hillary's mind had been on Matthew. The parrot was her last link to him, the only thing she had left that reminded her of him. Spot used so many phrases Matthew used, and there were times when he still mimicked Matthew's voice. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Spot. It would be like losing Matthew all over again. With her departed husband on her mind, it was hard to be welcoming to Preston. Hillary and Preston walked, and she glanced around, looking for any townsfolk who might be on the road. Thankfully, it was quiet. She didn't want rumors to circulate about her and Preston being something more. The town was already speculating after the two had worked together on a murder case a few months ago. These prolonged walks would only increase the rumors, confirming them to many. Hillary wasn't in the mood to be the center of gossip again. After the case was closed, she had been for a while and she didn't care for it. It put a real damper on the excitement of helping to solve a murder. "We've been having really good weather," Hillary said. "The winter was colder than I'd expected. I'm glad it's over." "Oh yes. I can imagine it's different, after you've been in Miami for so many years." Hillary nodded. "It takes a while to settle in somewhere. Every time I think I've got it now, something else happens that reminds me I'm not from around here." Preston looked at her, smiling. "Well, I think you're doing well. It's not easy to get used to a new place, let alone start a business while doing it. And something special is a hit, that's for sure." Hillary nodded. It was true. She had taken on a huge task, as she usually did. She was doing well, though. Preston was right. "My nephew told me a joke the other day," Preston said. "He's only starting to understand how jokes work. It's the cutest thing." "What was the joke?" Hillary asked. Preston glanced at her and cleared his throat. "A lot of people cry when they cut an onion. The trick is not to form an emotional bond." Hillary looked at Preston and burst out laughing. "He said that? He's 8, isn't he?" "That's exactly what he said. My sister was making us a salad, and she's terrible when it comes to cutting onions. I think he heard it somewhere, they always do, but it was adorable." Hillary was still laughing. "I can imagine. Kids are amazing. I remember when Annabelle was that age. I don't remember her telling a lot of jokes, but she used to be obsessed with romance, wedding dresses and flowers and hearts." "Didn't you ever dream about that? About a happily ever after?" Preston asked. Hillary nodded. "Yes, I did," she said. "And then I met Matthew. He was all of that for me." Preston fell quiet, and a sadness wrapped itself around Hillary again. They walked together in silence for a while. "You're a strong woman," Preston said. "It takes a lot out of you to lose someone special." Hillary smiled. She wanted to take Preston's hand and squeeze it in thanks for being so kind about it, but she didn't. She didn't want to give him any ideas or let it come across wrong. But she was grateful that he was so understanding. It was one of the reasons she couldn't send him away when he offered to walk with her, despite the gossip. He was a good man, respectable and caring, and he made her laugh. Anyone who took that much time to make someone else feel better deserved a chance, even if it was a friendship and nothing more. Preston was a good friend. They delivered the first 2 baskets together. The third was addressed to an apartment. Karolina Mikhailovsky was Lisa Bingham's au pair, and she had worked for Naomi a few times as well. She'd ordered one of the baskets, and it had sent quite a ripple of gossip through town, as Rose happened to be in the shop at the time. It was no secret that Karolina and Naomi's husband, Teddy, had had something going. Karolina was sweet and great with kids, a Russian girl far from home. People in town loved her, aside from the fact that she carried on with a married man. Hillary rang the bell for Karolina, and a window opened above them. A woman poked her head out. "Oh, officer," the woman cried out in strongly accented English. "I can't believe you're here already. Please come in." Preston and Hillary exchanged a confused look, but the door clicked open before they could say anything. Hillary picked up Karolina's gift basket, and they headed into the building. Before the door swung closed, Spot squawked and flew out. "No!" Hillary cried out. He'll be back in a minute, Preston said. He's probably going back to the van. We won't be long. Hillary was still upset about the confrontation with Naomi, and would have preferred not to let Spot out of her sight. But the door to Carolina's apartment opened, and the woman stepped out. She looked older than she had from the window, her blonde hair graying at the roots. Her eyes were worried, her hands fiddling with a handkerchief. "I'm so glad you're here," she said to Preston. She didn't pay any attention at all to Hillary and her gift basket. "What's wrong?" Preston asked. He was on high alert now. "I'm Maria Castronova, friend to Carolina. I came up to Rosemary Harbor to visit her, but she's not here." "And you're sure she's not just out running errands for Mrs. Bingham?" Preston asked. Maria shook her head. "I arrived last night and let myself in with her key. She wasn't home and never returned. She never answered her phone either. I said all of it in the report." "What report?" Preston asked. Maria looked at Hillary and back at Preston. "This missing persons report I just filed. Isn't it why you're here?" She looked at the basket Hillary held and frowned. Preston shook his head. "I was accompanying Hillary on her delivery run," Preston said, and Hillary fought the urge to grimace. She'd hoped he wouldn't say that, creating space for misinterpretation about their relationship. But Maria was too worried about Carolina to think about what it meant that Hillary and Preston were delivering her gift baskets together. Preston opened his mouth to speak when his phone beeped. He took it out of his pocket and glanced at the screen. It said much the same as Maria was saying to him now. It was a case of being in the right place at the right time. He pocketed his phone and looked at Maria. She was frantic enough for him to believe that something was wrong, but he would do what he could to keep the woman calm. "We will get on it right away, Ms. Castronova," he said. "Rosemary Harbor is a small, tight-knit community." By that he meant gossiping and in each other's business. "Someone is bound to find her. I'm sure we'll have her back home in no time." Ms. Castronova nodded, but she didn't look reassured at all. "We are supposed to travel to Russia together. As soon as she has some time off," she said. Preston nodded, although he didn't see how that information was relevant. He was sure they would find Carolina. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. That happened often enough. Carolina was somewhere close by, he was sure of it. Hillary held out the basket, drawing Maria's attention to it. "Carolina ordered this." Maria looked at her blankly. Hillary wanted to leave. This wasn't her scene. She was here on behalf of something special, and nothing more. She felt awkward, and she wanted to get out of there as soon as she could. "Shall I put it on the table over there?" she asked, but Maria didn't respond. The older woman seemed very worried. "I'll put it on the table," Hillary said again when there was no response. She walked to the table and set the gift basket down. When she turned, Maria looked like she was on the verge of tears. "She might be at work already," Hillary offered. "Sometimes her employer leaves very early and Carolina has to be there to take care of the kids." Although that didn't explain where she'd been overnight. Maria nodded absently. Hillary tried to calm her down, but Maria seemed sure something was wrong. Hillary was sure that Carolina would turn up. She was always around town running errands for Lisa or taking the kids out. She herself had seen Carolina the evening before, pulling her car out of Lisa Bingham's driveway when Hillary and Annabelle were on their way home. She would turn up, she was sure of it. A racket at the window made all three of them jump, and Spot pushed his way through the curtains. The window must still have been open. The clever bird sure had a knack for breaking and entering. Hillary was relieved to see him. "Come on, Spot," she said. "You're making a nuisance of yourself." The parrot flew to Hillary and landed on her shoulder. His grip was awkward, only one claw grabbing onto her clothes. "What do you have there?" Hillary asked, taking Spot off her shoulder. The parrot clutched something dark in its claw and Hillary pried it loose. "What is it?" Preston asked, irritated with the parrot. The bird was everywhere, and lately he had been taking things that didn't belong to him. Sure, it was usually almonds, but it still counted as theft in his books, and that didn't sit well with an officer of the law. Preston felt that it might be his fault, too. He had fed the parrot unsalted almonds as a reward for helping solve the last murder case he had worked on, and since then, the parrot had gotten out of control. "It's an almond," Hillary said, finally getting a hold of the piece. It was a miracle Spot had brought it to her, instead of consuming it. "Where did you get it?" she asked Spot. "Dead body," the parrot squawked. Hillary's blood ran cold. "What?" "Dead body," Spot said again. A few months ago, Hillary would have laughed it off or called the parrot crazy, but she had learned that he told the truth about what he'd seen or heard. If it didn't make sense, it wasn't his fault. Preston stared at the bird. He had learned, too, that the parrot said what it saw. "What does he mean?" Maria asked. Preston swallowed hard. Maria had been worried about Carolina. He hoped she was wrong. Chapter 3. The crime scene investigators were called in shortly after Spot had arrived with his almond. The courts had accepted Spot's playback of a conversation as evidence in a murder trial, so Preston accepted Spot's words as something he needed to pay attention to. It wasn't every day that a parrot with an extensive vocabulary spoke about a dead body. Shortly after the CSI team had arrived and the almond had been bagged as elemental to what had happened, a report came in that a dead body had indeed been found. It was Carolina's body, just as Maria Castronova had feared. The poor woman didn't have to identify the body, which Preston saw as a blessing in disguise. There was nothing more traumatic than positively identifying the dead body of a loved one. Preston had known Carolina like everyone else in town, and there was no doubt that it was her body. The body was at the morgue now, being prepared for an autopsy to discover the cause of death. "I'm going to leave," Hillary said when she found Preston. He'd just finished a call and turned to her. A weight of sadness pressed down upon him, as it always did when someone's life was lost. Usually, the crimes in and around Rosemary Harbor were small and relatively harmless. The other officers often complained about being bored, but this situation reminded Preston of how lucky they were to deal with mundane cases most of the time. He didn't wish for more of this. "I think that's best," Preston said. Hillary had been taking care of Maria, keeping her calm when they realized the dead body was Carolina. She looked tired and a little haunted, and that was never good to see in anyone. After leaving Maria in the care of one of the officers, Hillary took her leave and headed back to something special. When the last murder had happened in Rosemary Harbor, she had barely known the victim, Reginald Danvers. It was sad to hear that someone had lost his life, but it hadn't affected her personally. This time, she'd known Carolina. She had only spoken to her a few times, but she'd seen her around often enough to feel her loss. It wasn't sorrow alone that Hillary felt, though. She was angry. "That took a while," Rose said when Hillary finally walked into the shop. Spot hopped onto his perch close to the door, unaware of how serious his observation had been. "Yeah, I was held up by the police." Annabelle and Rose both stopped what they were doing and approached Hillary, curious. "You're saying it like it wasn't just a rendezvous with Preston," Rose said. Hillary shook her head. "No, it wasn't." She didn't mention that it had started as something of the sort. "Carolina is dead." Rose and Annabelle gaped at her. "What?" Annabelle asked. Carolina was her age. She'd been out with her a few times. They hadn't exactly gotten along, but Annabelle had felt sorry for Carolina because she barely had any friends. Not that Annabelle had a ton of friends here herself. They found her body earlier. Her friend was at Carolina's apartment and reported her as missing, and I happened to be delivering her basket at the same time. "That's awful," Rose said. "It's awful for her, yes," Hillary said. "But guess how the body was discovered?" "A wild guess, come on." Hillary's voice was snappy as she struggled to control her anger. She wasn't sure why she was so upset, only that she was. When Rose and Annabelle both stared at her blankly, Hillary sighed. It was Spot. Again, she said. Rose and Annabelle gasped. The parrot had a way of sniffing out trouble as well as almonds, and it wasn't a good thing. You're upset, Rose said. Of course she's upset, Annabelle interjected. She was part of a murder. Exactly, Hillary said. I can't believe I'm involved with another death. And with Preston being there, I'm sure they'll start up the rumors again. Rose frowned. There was a lot of police, I'm guessing? Preston was with me when I made the deliveries, Hillary admitted. Annabelle raised her eyebrows. Hillary ignored her daughter's reaction. Yes, it was interesting to be involved in Reginald Danvers' case, but I just want to live on the down low for a while. Keep my head down. Not be associated with everything happening around town. Those rumors about me were brutal, if you remember. It had been bad enough that her gift basket had been a part of Reginald Danvers' murder a couple of months ago. But some of the things the people around town were saying. She didn't want to be involved again. I get you, Mom, Annabelle said. It's weird that you're always dragged into it. I think you deserve a break. Rose shook her head. Nonsense. In this small town, no one can be left out of anything, you both know that. Besides, Hillary is too young to pack herself away. She ought to be out there dating and living her life. How did this suddenly turn to dating? Annabelle asked. We're talking about the drama she just witnessed with a dead body, not her potential love life. Hillary rolled her eyes and turned away from Annabelle and Rose, who were getting into it again. The two of them never agreed about Hillary's social life. Rose was adamant that she should get out there again and start dating. Matthew had died, but that was no reason for Hillary to stop living. Annabelle disagreed. She had admired her parents' perfect marriage, and she felt that if Hillary started dating again, she would be betraying Matthew. Movement across the street caught Hillary's eye, and she watched Teddy trundle across the road and walk into the bookstore. End of the road books was a quiet place with the feel of a library and chairs between the shelves to read books, even if you weren't planning on buying them. Getting away from the two women's bickering and into a quiet sanctuary like End of the Road books sounded exactly like what Hillary needed. I'm going to get some air, she said, barely interrupting Annabelle and Rose in their argument before she slipped out of the store. She took care to leave Spot behind, closing the door before he could escape and come with her. The last thing she needed was for the bird to find something else to drag her deeper into a mess. Hillary entered the bookstore and started browsing the fiction shelf. She enjoyed romance books, and it was high time to get a new one. Through the opening between the eye-level books and the shelf above them, Hillary spotted Teddy in the next aisle, and she couldn't help but spy. She was as curious as everyone else in this town, although she preferred to keep gossip to herself. Teddy had a book pinched under his arm, and Hillary noticed the title. It was about reconnecting with your spouse. In his hand, he had a book about earning extra income. Hillary felt for Teddy. He was obviously serious about making amends with Naomi. He had been unfaithful, and Hillary didn't condone that kind of behavior at all, but Teddy was clearly looking for a way to make things right. Everyone made mistakes, and it touched Hillary that he would still try. Naomi had looked worried when she realized that Teddy still had a key to the shop. It had been hinted that he could have sabotaged his wife's almonds to get even with her for her response to his infidelity. But with him looking up how to make amends, Hillary wondered if it was true. Would a man who was so eager to fix things with his wife sabotage her business? She didn't think so. It made her wonder what happened to the nuts then. Whatever it was, it couldn't have been Teddy, just like it couldn't have been Spot. As she watched, the young store clerk, Mandy someone, came to Teddy. Mandy worked at the bookstore while she was supposedly deciding what she wanted to do with her life. She had started working there fresh out of high school, but after 3 years she was still in the same place. Everyone speculated that the hours and the pay were convenient enough to slow her ambitions. She was a sweet girl, albeit a little too comfortable around men. Mandy had a flirtatious way about her, all rolling hips and easy smiles, and everyone knew that she pursued men rather than a career. Everyone had a talent, and hers was obviously seduction. Still, Hillary had always thought she would grow up eventually. "Can I help you?" Mandy asked Teddy. He looked up at her, and a smile broke over his face. His eyes slid up and down her body. It didn't seem very much like a man who wanted to commit to his wife, Hillary thought. Teddy closed the book he was reading and put it back on the shelf. He put back the book on reconnecting as well and turned back to Mandy. "I have everything I need." He looked at her like there was a double meaning to his words, and Hillary was sure she knew what he was saying between the lines. "Is the store empty?" Teddy asked. Mandy nodded. She must not have seen Hillary come in. "I put the back in 5 sign up." Teddy smiled and pulled Mandy against him. They had the ease of lovers. This wasn't the first time. Teddy kissed Mandy and they stood there with their lips locked for the longest time. Hillary felt embarrassed watching them. Embarrassed for Naomi's sake. She guessed Teddy was as much of a slimebag now as he had been before. Why he had bothered with those books at all was beyond her. Hillary walked away, opened the door with the sign and closed it behind her. She doubted they would hear her or see her, they were so wrapped up in each other. Infidelity disgusted her, and she left the bookshop with a foul taste in her mouth. If this was who Teddy was, and if he had what it took to hide relationships the way he did with Mandy, what else was he hiding? It seemed like he could harbor a million secrets, and no one would know. Suddenly, it didn't seem so absurd that Teddy could have been the one who stole Naomi's nuts. In fact, it seemed to Hillary that if a man was able to cheat on his wife without blinking an eye, he could do all sorts of immoral things. As Hillary walked back to something special, she didn't feel refreshed at all. She had left the store to get some air and clear her mind, but now she had a bad taste in her mouth, and she felt worse than ever. Chapter 4. Hillary stopped before she entered something special, and thought about what she had seen at the bookstore. Hillary wasn't one to gossip, but she couldn't let something like this go without saying anything about it. Everyone knew Teddy was a bit of an ass when it came to his marriage, but cheating on his wife while looking at books to fix his marriage was a new kind of low that didn't sit right with Hillary. She had to say something. So, instead of going back into her own shop and keeping the news to herself or speaking to Rose and Annabelle about what she saw, she crossed the road back to Sticky Sweet where they had started their day. The bell above the door rang when she opened the shop's door, and cool air from the air conditioner ruffled her auburn hair as she walked inside. Naomi emerged from the back room where she made her sweets and packaged nuts. She had a smile on her face that she used to greet customers with. When she saw Hillary, that smile faded. Naomi had no idea what to think about the incident that had happened in the back room that morning. She was under immense pressure because of the stolen nuts, and that feather had shown up when it had no business being in her store. But Teddy did still have a key, and she didn't trust him anymore. Not with anything in her life. Naomi had blamed Hillary for the nuts disappearing, but she didn't know what was what anymore. All that had to wait while she frantically tried to fill the order for the weekend, and Hillary was the last person she wanted to see. "I hope you're not here about the nuts again," Naomi said coldly. Hillary shook her head. "No, this is a little more personal. It's not business at all, it's woman to woman." Naomi frowned. She hated the sound of it already. "What do you mean?" she asked. Hillary took a deep breath. How would she tell Naomi that her husband was cheating on her? How could she be a friend, but deliver news that might make her an enemy? "I saw Teddy in the bookstore a few minutes ago," Hillary started. Naomi groaned, already hating where this was going. Her relationship with Teddy and his reputation were constant topics of conversation around town, and she was starting to resent it. "Hear me out," Hillary pleaded. She hated having to do this, but she felt it was her duty. Naomi folded her arms over her chest and sighed, nodding. He was with Mandy, the store clerk, Hillary continued. He was holding a book on reconciliation, but he's not faithful. When he comes to you trying to make up, don't believe him. Naomi's face was expressionless. I would appreciate you staying out of my business, she said coldly. I'm just trying to help, Hillary said, offended. The bell above the door rang, and a customer stepped in. It was an older man who nodded at Naomi in greeting before browsing the far shelf. Thank you for going out of your way, Naomi said. I think I've got it. Hillary shook her head, not willing to let it go. I know you're unhappy with me and I understand why, but can't we put our differences aside for this? I know how much it must hurt. Naomi shook her head, irritated now that Hillary was pushing the topic in front of a customer. Another customer walked in, and it was getting crowded in the tense atmosphere. I said I have it covered, Naomi snapped. Hillary was angry now. She was only trying to help. If you're willing to accept your husband's behavior, then I guess there's nothing I can do about it. She said it loud enough for the two customers to hear, and they both glanced at Hillary and Naomi. Naomi opened her mouth to speak, but Hillary didn't want to hear it. If she was going to be treated like the enemy when she had done nothing wrong, she wasn't going to stay to hear Naomi out. Maybe we should talk in the back, Naomi responded. She wasn't quite as cold as she'd sounded before. Hillary hesitated. She'd been on the verge of storming out of the shop. Naomi glanced at the customers, and Hillary understood she needed to talk about it privately. She nodded curtly. Naomi knew that Hillary was trying to help, but it was humiliating to hear from someone else that her husband was fooling around again. She wanted to explain to Hillary what was happening and about their pending divorce so that the woman would understand that Naomi wasn't being tricked. Before they could go to the back, the door opened again and Chief Davis walked in. Ladies, Preston said curtly, greeting them. I'm sorry to barge in on you like this, Naomi, but I need to take you to the station for questioning. Naomi's stomach turned to stone. What? She asked in a small voice. She looked at Hillary, frantic. Hillary shrugged, knowing as little as Naomi. I'm sure you've heard by now that Karolina Mikhailovsky is dead. Naomi nodded grimly. Karolina had worked for her a few times, and Naomi had been happy to help the girl make a little extra spending money. Then she found out about her and Teddy, and that was the last time Karolina earned any extra income from her. An autopsy revealed that she died from anaphylactic shock. She was severely allergic to nuts. The almonds we believe she died from has been traced back to Sticky Sweet. Hillary gasped and Naomi felt sick to her stomach. She swayed on her feet. Hillary grabbed an arm so she wouldn't fall. That can't be, Naomi said, breathless. You're not under arrest, Preston said. We just want to ask you a few questions. I know you and Karolina didn't end on good terms. Preston was speaking softly so as not to make a scene. He didn't want to scare Naomi. He was glad Hillary was there to soften the blow. Hillary held on to Naomi, shocked that evidence pointed to Sticky Sweet. Her mind jumped to the stolen nuts, and she wondered if it was connected. Naomi wished the earth would open up and swallow her. Preston was right, of course. It was no secret that she had fired Karolina after finding her in bed with Teddy. She had been furious, screaming at the woman to jump off a cliff. It looked bad now. I'm not going to escort you out like a criminal, Naomi, Preston said, and Hillary appreciated his kindness. But I need you to lock up the store quietly and follow me to the police station. Naomi could barely breathe. Her chest was tight, and she felt like she was going to throw up. The thought that her almonds killed the girl was too much to bear. And what if they blamed her for the death? I'll be there, Naomi said hoarsely. She turned to Hillary. Please lock up the shop for me. The key is under the counter. Hillary couldn't very well refuse Naomi when Preston was taking her away for questioning. She had to admit that the series of events looked bad for Naomi. Her fight with Carolina after Teddy had slept with her, the nuts that had been traced back to the shop, and now Carolina's death. Even though she didn't think Naomi was capable of something like that, the evidence was damning. Naomi would be a suspect for murder, and Hillary felt for the woman. She had been through so much already. After closing up Sticky Sweet, Hillary headed back to something special. She wasn't a gossip, she kept telling herself. But she wanted to tell Rose and Annabelle what had happened so badly. She was in the middle of a case once again. She'd been there when Carolina had been reported missing, and she'd been there to see Naomi pointed out as the first suspect. No matter what she tried, she couldn't get away from it. It seemed to follow her. Annabelle and Rose listened intently as Hillary told them what had happened, including what she saw at the bookstore. There was never a dull moment in Rosemary Harbor. Rose had seen her fair share of drama around town, but it never ceased to amaze her. She could tell that Hillary was flustered and annoyed. Hillary didn't want to be involved, but she'd been thrown in the middle anyway. "Let's have some tea," Rose said, beckoning Hillary to the back. "Annabelle can keep an eye out here." Annabelle nodded reluctantly. She wanted to be a part of the gossip, but she could see her mother wasn't in a good space about the murder, and Rose was a great shoulder to cry on. Rose led Hillary into the little staff kitchen and put on the kettle. She made tea for them, and they sat down on the couch with their fingers wrapped around the hot cups. "A lot going at the moment," Rose said. Hillary nodded. "Tell me about it. I can't get the image of Teddy and Mandy out of my mind. It infuriates me. And that it's all happening at the same time as Carolina's death is unbelievable." Rose sipped her tea before she answered. "It's bad timing," she said. "But it's not the first time someone caught Teddy with another woman. The drama between Naomi and Teddy is not hard to come by in this town." "I guess so," Hillary said. She couldn't believe Rose was so calm about it. But she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, and rumors of his infidelity had been doing the rounds for so long, maybe it wasn't shocking anymore. "The thing is," Rose continued, "Naomi has known about Teddy and his ways for a while now. At first, it seemed like she thrived on being the victim. Some women are like that, you know. But everyone reaches their end, and now it seems Naomi is annoyed by it and even resents others knowing about it, rather than wanting sympathy." Hillary drank her tea, listening to what Rose was saying. She knew that there was truth in what she said, but it was a hard pill for her to swallow. She had been very devoted to Matthew. They had done everything together, and even the thought of cheating on him, doing that to someone she loved, sent chills down her spine. To think that Naomi had suffered through it time and time again made her feel terrible for the woman, and it bred a hatred for Teddy that Hillary hadn't felt earlier. She'd had time to digest it now, and it made her want to vomit. "What I don't understand is why she didn't leave him a long time ago," Hillary said. Rose shrugged. "I don't think it's easy to do. We see the bad in Teddy, but Naomi married him for a reason, and there must be redeeming qualities, at least in her eyes. It's not easy." Rose had been married twice, and she knew a thing or two about love. Hillary had been madly in love with Matthew, and she thought that if he had done the same thing, as hurtful as it would have been, she might have considered forgiving him too. When Naomi walked in on Teddy and Carolina, it was at her own house. She'd been away at a chocolate-making course and came home earlier than expected. It's quite different than hearing it from someone else. Hillary nodded. She'd heard about the drama. Naomi had kicked Teddy out of her house with such a scene that the whole town had known about it in less than an hour. Even Hillary had been unable to avoid hearing about it. "If you ask me, Naomi could have killed Carolina." "Rose," Hillary cried out. She was appalled that Rose would think Naomi capable of murder. Hillary had known Naomi almost from the moment she had moved into town. Rose had known Naomi much longer, of course. But murder? What do they call it? A crime of passion? If she was so upset about Teddy sleeping with Carolina, she could have killed her before coming to her senses. 2 weeks later, Hillary asked. Naomi had caught Teddy and Carolina together 2 weeks ago. Surely Naomi would have come to her senses in that time. Love is a funny thing, Rose said. But no one asks me about it, so I don't say it. Hillary shook her head. Rose was the most curious person she had ever met, and she was highly opinionated. She wasn't scared to voice her thoughts on a matter either, but if she said something like that to the police, Hillary was sure Rose would get someone in trouble. You have to be careful with what you say, Rose, Hillary warned. Maybe you should keep those thoughts to yourself. Rose shrugged. She knew she couldn't go around accusing people of murder, but Naomi had been hurt in a way she hadn't before. Besides, who else would have killed Carolina? She'd been loved around town. Well, maybe murder is a stretch, Rose admitted. Hillary relaxed, knowing that her friend wouldn't spread the word about her speculation. But the almonds have been bugging me all day. 10 gallons is a lot of nuts. Much too much for Spot, Hillary agreed. Maybe he had some of it. He's a sneaky little bugger. But 10 gallons is absurd. I think Teddy did it. Did what? He wouldn't hurt Carolina if he cared about her. Rose shook her head, putting down her empty teacup. Not the murder, the almonds, she said. I think Naomi putting him out of the house is a good reason for Teddy to steal a bunch of nuts. Could have done it out of spite. Hillary thought about it. It's certainly possible. A crime of passion. Rose was getting carried away, Hillary thought. It wasn't impossible, though. She had been glad to know Teddy had a key to the candy shop, if only to get the attention away from Spot, whom she was unwilling to give up to animal control. But had he really used that key to sneak into the shop? I guess we'll just have to wait and see, Hillary finally said. There's bound to be more information as soon as they question Naomi, and in this town there are very few secrets. It's what I'm counting on, Rose said, looking happy. Rumors and gossip made Rose's world go round. Chapter 5. That night, Hillary couldn't sleep. Something about the day didn't add up. She ran through it again and again, trying to find what was bugging her, trying to figure out what was wrong. It wasn't about Teddy and Mandy, even though she couldn't think about it without becoming furious with the man. And with Mandy, for that matter. What kind of woman was fine with playing around with married men? When she heard that Reginald and Jessica Danvers had had multiple affairs, it was sad, but she hadn't known them as well. Teddy's affairs were different. Naomi had been a victim, faithful to a man who had never been faithful to her. It hit Hillary harder because she knew Naomi and considered her a friend, despite her accusations against Spot. Hillary tossed and turned in bed. With the sheets over her body she was too hot, without them she was too cold. Light from the full moon peeped through a crack in the curtains, and it bothered Hillary. She got up and opened the curtains wide, looking out into the night. It was quiet, and the moonlight spread a silver sheen over everything, giving it a surreal quality. Naomi had been upset after Hillary told her about Teddy in the bookstore. For a while, it seemed she didn't want to hear a word of it from Hillary. But then she changed her tune and wanted to speak to her in the back room of the shop. Hillary never found out what Naomi wanted to talk with her about, but that wasn't what bothered her either. She kept searching her mind. Preston had called Naomi in, no doubt because she was a suspect. The almond Spot found had come out of Carolina's bag. They'd found another piece in her bag, and it was the same. Thank goodness Spot hadn't eaten that piece, or they might never have known. Hillary closed the curtain and got back into bed. She hoped she could get some sleep. Running over the facts again and again wouldn't help her if she had nothing more to go on. It was keeping her up for no reason at all. Hillary closed her eyes and slowly sank into sleep, letting her muscles relax and emptying her mind. Suddenly, she knew what it was. Her eyes shot open. The nuts in Naomi's store, it had been taken. Stolen. If Teddy had wanted to sabotage Naomi out of revenge, the best way to do that would have been to spill it. What good would it do him to steal it? That was what didn't make sense. If Teddy had been behind it all, it would have served him better if he'd made the nuts unusable and not just stolen it, running the risk of someone finding it on him. Who had taken the nuts then, and why? It must have been to use them somehow. No one would steal that many nuts only to throw it away or dump it somewhere, then move on. It didn't make sense at all. So, who could have taken it? Hillary's mind ran through all the possibilities, but none of them made sense. Carolina was dead, and it didn't make sense that it was her. She couldn't see how any of Teddy's other lovers had a reason, and Teddy himself would rather have spoiled it than take it. Spot didn't eat it all, he couldn't have. Who else was left? Hillary couldn't think of anyone else with a motive to steal it. She didn't know if Naomi had more enemies, but she knew the town would know if she had. If there was one thing that couldn't stay in one place in Rosemary Harbor, it was a secret. Did someone perhaps try to frame Spot to get away with the murder? Hillary thought about the feather Naomi found in Sticky Sweet. What if Spot hadn't been there at all, but someone else placed the feather there? The whole town knew about Spot's affinity for almonds. That wasn't a secret either. But of course, what would the motivation be to frame a parrot of all things? Framing a person would make more sense. Except a parrot wouldn't be able to defend itself. Hillary's mind was whirring again, running through the possibilities. It didn't look like sleep was going to come to her anytime soon. Another thought struck her. What if Naomi had done something to get rid of the nuts, and then said it was stolen? She had been called in for questioning earlier that day. What if she had done it to cover up her own tracks? To sway the investigation and lead them away from her? That would mean that she was guilty of murder. Hillary shook her head, physically trying to get rid of the thoughts. She couldn't believe Naomi would do something like that. The woman could be a bit harsh sometimes, and in her emotional state, she was offensive. She'd cold-heartedly suggested they give Spot up to animal control. Spot, the pet she'd had for years. But taking someone else's life was a different story, and try as she might, Hillary couldn't imagine that Naomi would do something like that. She didn't seem like the type. Hillary closed her eyes again. She wouldn't find any answers mulling over the facts like this, and she needed to get sleep if she wanted to be able to function at work in the morning. She would have to figure it out when she had more facts to work with. Maybe something came up in the police's questioning of Naomi. Until then, Hillary would have to relax. Hadn't she said she didn't want to be a part of a murder case again? That she wanted to lie low for this one? But Hillary wasn't able to help herself. It was the way her mind worked, and when there was a puzzle to solve, she needed to solve it. But tomorrow was another day, and there would be new facts with the new light. She let herself calm, relaxing her body, and finally she slipped into sleep. The next morning, Hillary woke up groggy. "Are you okay, Mom?" Annabelle asked, making coffee as Hillary walked into the kitchen. "Yeah, fine, honey," Hillary said. "I had a restless night, that's all." "Are you worried about Naomi?" Annabelle asked. Hillary wasn't worried. She was confused and curious. Fascinated, even. What did that say about her? "I don't know what to make of it," Hillary answered honestly. Annabelle nodded and handed Hillary a cup of coffee. She blew on the top of hers before taking a sip. Her mother was a little distant, and that made her unsure. Hillary often slipped away into her own little world. She had always looked at everything just a little differently. "Well, I'm worried about Naomi," Annabelle said. "What if she's innocent, but they lock her up for it anyway? People go to prison based on circumstantial evidence all the time." Hillary thought about that for a few moments. Finally, she shook her head. "I don't think Preston would make a mistake like that. He's always very careful. I really think he'd rather let a case slide than convict the wrong person." Annabelle nodded in agreement. If it hadn't been for Spot, Preston wouldn't have found the killer because he wasn't willing to point fingers when he wasn't sure. Still, the thought of sending someone to jail for murder when they were innocent scared her. No one deserved that. "We should get going," Hillary said. "Once we're in town, I'm sure we'll find out more. If there is news out there, we'll hear of it." Annabelle knew her mom was right. Having Rose in the shop was like having a private line to the gossip station. Annabelle thought if Rose could have told them something before it even happened, she would have. When they arrived at something special, Hillary glanced at Sticky Sweet across the street. The shop was quiet, still locked up as she had left it the day before. Annabelle and Hillary both went into something special and opened up for the day, unpacking stock and taking care of business. "What do you think is going to happen to Naomi?" Annabelle asked Rose when she arrived mid-morning. "I think they're going to keep her in a holding cell until they know more," Rose said. She fancied herself able to guess what was going to happen, almost like a sixth sense. Hillary rolled her eyes and went to the front of the store. Just then, the bell announced a customer. She didn't like Rose speculating about Naomi's guilt. She helped the customer put together a custom basket for a new mother, and after the customer paid, Hillary looked out the window towards Sticky Sweet again. She frowned. The shop was open for business, and there was movement inside. As Hillary watched, Naomi moved to the storefront to rearrange the window display. So they had let her go. So much for Rose's sixth sense. Naomi being free meant either that she was innocent or that Preston hadn't found out enough to charge her. She was hoping for the former, but a curious part of her wanted facts, not gossip, she told herself. She wanted to know what really happened. The only person who could tell her that was Preston. Hillary hesitated to call him. She didn't want to come across as nosy. But in fact she was. And she desperately wanted to know. During her lunch break, Hillary dialed Preston's number. She couldn't help herself. "What a pleasure to hear from you," Preston said when he answered the phone. Hillary could hear the smile in his voice. "How are you doing?" Hillary asked. "Better now that I'm speaking to you." He was flirting. "I bet you have your hands full now with the case. Are you coping?" Hillary asked. She felt bad that she was making it sound like she'd only called to inquire about Preston's welfare. She told herself that she did care about that, but she also wanted info about the case. "Yeah, I'm doing well enough. This is what I was trained for, after all. It's very kind of you to ask. Have you managed to find anything else out, or are you still with your hands in your hair?" Hillary asked, fishing for information rather than asking for it straight. "We're getting there," Preston said. "It's a relief to know I'm still good for something. Running around solving mailbox theft is hardly the measure of a police chief." "I can imagine," Hillary said. "How is Naomi doing? I noticed she's at the shop today." Preston was silent on the line for a moment. "You're phoning to see what we found out," Preston said. It wasn't a question, and he sounded deflated. Hillary squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. "I was worried about her," she said. It wasn't a complete lie. "You know, because she asked me to close up the shop for her yesterday." "Of course," Preston said in a tone that suggested he didn't believe her. "Well, based on the time of death, her alibi checks out, so there's nothing more to it. She is free to spend her time as she pleases." It was exactly what Hillary had wanted to know, but she felt bad for leading Preston on. She had to make it up to him somehow. He was still a good friend, even if she didn't want more. "Listen, there is one more reason I called," Hillary fibbed, thinking of a flyer she had seen a few days ago. She really wanted to make him feel better. "You probably know the Rotary Club is doing a bonfire in the park with s'mores tonight. They're doing sponsorship tents and everything as well, but it sounds like a fun night out. Do you want to go with me?" Preston hesitated. "Are you inviting me as a friend?" he asked. "Yeah, I guess I am," Hillary said. She had to be honest with him about it. She liked spending time with Preston, but she wasn't ready for anything else. And with Annabelle so protective over Hillary's love life, she would already be upset about a s'mores evening. Preston seemed to think about it for a moment. Hillary wasn't sure if he would accept or not. She hoped he would because she felt bad about calling him for no reason other than to badger him about the case. "Okay," Preston finally said. "I'd like that." Hillary sighed in relief. "I'll meet you at the park at 8, how does that sound?" "You don't want me to pick you up?" Preston asked. It was a bit much, and Hillary declined, claiming she had to do a stock take that would take too long. That part was true. "All right, tonight at 8, Preston said before dropping the call. Hillary put the phone on the counter and sighed. That had been uncomfortable. She had to get a grip on her curiosity. The bell above the door jingled, and Marian Murdoch walked into the store. Her dark brown hair, colored to keep the gray away, was perfectly trimmed and styled as if she had come straight from the salon. Her lips and nails were the same deep shade of red, and she wore a dress that was as exotic as it was eccentric. "Hello, Marian," Hillary said. "Are you here for your baskets?" Marian nodded, without a smile. "I'm going to win that golden arrow, and then I'm going to present myself to Maid Marian," Spot said, quoting Robin Hood. Marian looked at the parrot, not amused. "You're talking bird," she said tightly. Hillary shook her head, laughing. "He quotes by association," she said. Marian still didn't crack a smile. "Yes, the baskets," she said. Marian had ordered gift baskets through the Rosemary Harbor Primary School fundraiser, where her kids attended. Hillary had waited for her to pick them up, rather than deliver them. "I'll have Annabelle bring them out for you," Hillary said. "We can settle payment in the meantime." "Oh, won't you be a dear and send me the bill? I'll appreciate it so much." Hillary smiled politely but shook her head. "I'm sorry, Marian. I'm afraid I'll have to take the card now." Marian sighed, irritated. She opened her handbag. "I had to send for a new card because my nanny lost the other. It was when the kids still needed her. Thank goodness I don't need to put up with that anymore." Marian was jittery, talking faster than was necessary. "I didn't know you had a nanny." "I hear a lot of parents have one now," Hillary said. "When she'd had Annabelle, she'd done everything herself. She'd taken care of school runs and homework and assignments. She'd done sporting events and PTA meetings. She'd done it all. The idea of having someone else raise her child seemed absurd. Oh, it's just impossible to keep up with it all nowadays. We have to be the modern women, you know? We have to be efficient, have a career and be a soccer mom, look like $1,000,000 and get enough sleep. It just isn't possible to do it alone anymore. I know our parents did it differently, but I wouldn't have made it without a nanny. Mostly anyway." Marian laughed nervously. She was quite a scatterbrain. "I'm better off without her now, if I must be honest. But she did the physical work, and that was what I needed." Hillary smiled and nodded and commented at the right times. She couldn't relate to Marian at all. The woman's life was so different than hers had been. But Marian was the customer, and the saying rang true: the customer was always right. So Hillary smiled and nodded and listened to it all. "Anyway, it's this nanny that foolishly lost my other card. I had it stopped, of course, and got a new one, but it was trouble I didn't need." Hillary waited patiently for Marian to keep fishing in her purse until she produced a card that was shiny and new, as if it had arrived in the post the day before. "Here," she said. Her attitude was blasé, but Hillary could tell Marian was highly strung. She seemed uncomfortable in her own skin, as though trying to stick with an image that didn't suit her and that wasn't natural. Hillary took the card with her business smile and swiped it. A moment later, the machine beeped. A slip rolled out and Hillary tore it off, frowning. "I'm so sorry, it declined," Hillary said, handing it back to Marian. Marian made a fuss of reading the receipt before she looked up, embarrassed. "That's not right," she said. "Try it again." She held the card out with determination. Hillary did as Marian asked, even though she knew it would decline again. The fault hadn't been with the machine. Sure enough, it declined again. She glanced up at Marian, who seemed to be getting more and more stressed out. Her hands fluttered like tiny birds, and she talked faster and faster. It must be a fault at the bank. This happens to me, you know. I'll have to go in again and sort it out with them. It's through no fault of my own, but I pay the price. Is it so hard for them to get it right? I just don't understand. She pressed her fingers to her temple as if she had a headache, and Hillary felt sorry for Marian. You know what, Marian? Hillary said, interrupting her. It's okay. Just mail the payment when you get a chance. Marian looked relieved. She flashed Hillary a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since she'd entered the store. You're a star, Hillary, she said. Hillary smiled and nodded. Don't even mention it, she said. Hillary and Annabelle carried the gift baskets to Marian's car and loaded them into the trunk for her. Marian chattered on while the women worked, and finally she left. I'm always exhausted after dealing with her, Hillary said to Annabelle. Annabelle agreed. Her mother usually took care of the difficult clients, and Annabelle was glad she hadn't had to deal with it. She didn't like Marian and her mannerisms. Everything about her was fake, and Annabelle had been raised not to like fake people. When they were back inside something special, Annabelle, Hillary, and Rose stood together around the counter. I always feel like she wants me to do everything better and faster, Hillary said, still talking about Marian. She's so efficient, it's intimidating. But she gets flustered quickly, Annabelle pointed out, and Hillary agreed. Rose leaned on the counter with both elbows and nodded, knowing everything about Marian. Marian Murdoch has always been uptight, she said. Some people are just like that. I grew up with her mother and the woman was tough as nails. Annabelle was glad that her parents had been so relaxed in their parenting. They had raised her with rules, of course, but they had allowed her to be herself. She was going on and on about her past nanny and how the girl had lost her debit card, Hillary said. I don't blame the poor nanny for being scatterbrained. Oh, it wasn't like that, Rose said. Marian never got along with the nanny. Eventually, the nanny left on her own, not because Marian told her to. It was a blow to her ego, of course. It's not every day someone can say their nanny quit because they're too much. Annabelle raised her eyebrows. That sounds dramatic. I'm glad it was just us, she said to Hillary. Hillary nodded. I'm glad too. Having a nanny sounds like hard work. To Rose she asked, who was the nanny? Does she still live here? Rose pulled up her shoulders and sighed. You'll never believe it. It was Carolina. Hillary's blood ran cold. Carolina was Marian's nanny, she asked. I didn't know this. It was right before she was hired by the Binghams, not too long ago, Rose said. They didn't have a very good history. It was starting to seem to Hillary that Carolina didn't have a good history with anyone. She had spoken to the girl a few times, and Carolina had seemed nice enough. When they'd moved to Rosemary Harbor, Hillary had even suggested that Annabelle befriend Carolina, so she would be less alone. The two had been roughly the same age. She wondered if they had dodged a bullet. I wonder how Marian feels about Carolina passing away, Hillary said. Strange that she didn't mention it while talking about her. Rose fished in her pocket and took out a packet of Oreos. She opened it and took one out, holding the dark brown sandwich biscuit between her fingers. Was she more flustered than usual? Annabelle asked. Rose shrugged. Who's to say what's usual for Marian? She brought the cookie to her lips and was about to take a bite when Spot swooped in and grabbed the Oreo from Rose's hands. Damn bird! Rose cried out, swinging her fist. Annabelle laughed. Hillary watched the spectacle, thinking that Marian hadn't been very nice about Carolina, considering that the poor girl was dead. Chapter 6. It was getting on 8 o'clock when Hillary closed up something special and got in her car. She had been taking stock with Rose, who agreed to lock up. Annabelle had left much earlier. When she found out that Hillary was meeting Preston, she tightly told her mom that she wouldn't be joining them to do a stocktake. Hillary didn't fight her on it. She had nothing to explain to Annabelle. The sun had already sunk below the horizon, the last of its rays doing little to light up the world, and by the time Hillary parked her car at the park, it was heavy twilight. She spotted Preston as she got out and walked to him. When he saw her, he smiled tightly. "Evening," he said. "Am I late?" Hillary asked, even though she knew she wasn't. Preston shook his head. "Right on time." There was tension in the air. It was Hillary's fault, and she knew it. "Shall we?" she asked and gestured with her head toward the park. Preston nodded and they turned and walked into the crowd together. There were a lot of people milling around in small groups or couples. The event had been set up so that stalls and tents were arranged around the outside, with a big bonfire in the middle. The stand sold snacks, promised s'mores only one of many, and hot and cold drinks. "How about coffee?" Preston suggested. Hillary agreed, and they walked to the tent together. The night was getting darker, and they were huddled together in the twilight, the semi-darkness saving them from too many prying eyes. People nodded at her and Preston in greeting, but Hillary told herself that they couldn't have much to say about her being there with him. There was nothing wrong with being friends, and today they were supporting the community. When they had their coffee, Hillary and Preston walked to the s'mores stall and got what they needed to join the many groups at the bonfire and make their own s'mores. "I haven't done this in such a long time," Hillary said. "It reminds me of when Annabelle was little. We used to go on camping trips and have s'mores and sleep in tents." Preston smiled. "That sounds like a fun time," he said. "It was," Hillary said. Her mind was full of Matthew again. "What about you? Did you ever go camping with your parents?" Preston shook his head. "Not with my parents, but I was a Boy Scout, so I did my fair share of camping and making s'mores." Hillary laughed. "That suits you so well," she said. "From Boy Scout to cop to police chief." "What can I say?" Preston said. "I'm ambitious." They laughed together and the ice was broken. The tension slipped away, and it was the two of them, standing side by side next to the fire as friends. For a while they made their s'mores and made small talk and jokes. Hillary got her fingers full of melted marshmallow, and the stickiness irritated her. "This happens to me every time," she said. She tried to open her handbag to find her wet wipes, but her fingers were dirty, and she didn't want to ruin her bag. "Oh, this is driving me nuts." Preston chuckled and took Hillary's hand in his, wiping her sticky fingers with a wipe he had produced out of nowhere. She looked up at him as he carefully wiped one hand and then the other for her, taking away all the stickiness. The gesture was so simple and so kind, it took Hillary's breath away. When Preston let go of her hands, their eyes met, and his smile was soft and gentle. Hillary's heart thundered in her chest. Somehow, the moment had turned romantic with that small gesture. Everything around them fell away, and it was only the two of them. "Hillary," Preston said, and his voice was deeper. "I have to admit, I'm confused about where we stand. I know you said you wanted to be friends before. But I'm getting mixed signals from you, and it's driving me crazy." Hillary swallowed hard. She knew she hadn't been fair to Preston, leading him on when she should have stayed neutral. But the truth was, she didn't feel friendship alone for him, not completely, and it was hard to act neutral when she wasn't. "What's going on between us?" Preston asked. "Are we just friends, or is there something more?" "I feel more, but it's no secret that I'm attracted to you. What do you feel for me? Where do we stand?" Hillary looked into the fire and tried to shuffle between the emotions she was feeling. "It's not a clean-cut answer for me, I'm afraid," Hillary said. "I am attracted to you. I'll be honest about it. And there are times when I am interested in pursuing it. But you're the first man I've been interested in since Matthew passed away, and it's harder than I thought it would be to move on from him." There are days when I still consider myself a married woman, and when his memories are so strong, I expect him to walk into the store to buy a gift for my mother-in-law. Preston listened quietly until she finished. I understand it can be difficult, Preston said. But I wish you would give it a chance. You're a wonderful woman, strong and kind and beautiful. I would like to court you. Hillary blushed at the compliments. I'm sorry I don't have better command over my emotions, she said. No need. I will take it slower, but I'll have you know you're on my radar, Hillary Sheridan. He smiled at Hillary, and even though the situation had escalated a lot faster than she'd expected, it wasn't a bad thing. What about your career? Preston asked. Hillary frowned. What do you mean? Are you considering becoming a private detective yourself? You're always involved in my cases, and I have to say you have a knack for it. Hillary laughed. Oh my goodness, no. Imagine aiming for a career like that at my age. I would have to start from the beginning. I would barely make it all the way to the top before I was too old to continue. She laughed. Preston shrugged, smiling. Well, I think you would have made a great detective. Which is code for saying I'm nosy, Hillary joked, and Preston didn't deny it. They laughed together before Hillary added, the thing is, I always try to stay out of it. It's never my intention to bust in on official business, you know? But I can't seem to stay away once I'm involved. My mind always runs through the facts until I figure them out. Like solving a puzzle. And once I have one piece, I can't help but search for the next. That is what would make you such a good detective, Preston said. On that note, however, I need to ask you to stay out of this investigation. I don't want to put you in danger. Hillary nodded. She had known it would only be a matter of time before she was asked to back off. The same had happened with the last murder investigation, though she hadn't been able to stay out of that one either. She didn't bother pointing out to Preston that it was thanks to her, well, her and Spot, that the previous case had been solved. But she was a civilian, and it was only right for Preston to ask her to stay out of it. I understand, Hillary said. Preston nodded, satisfied. Thank you, he said. You know it's not personal. I enjoy seeing the way you work, but you're not qualified to do this, and I can get in trouble if I let you in on the case. Of course, Hillary said. She turned her attention back to the bonfire and spotted Teddy a few feet away from her. She frowned, remembering what he had done in the bookstore. She was still so disgusted with him. While Hillary watched, Teddy took a few steps closer to the fire than was necessary. He looked around as if to see who was watching, not noticing her. He had a packet of something in his hand, and after making sure no one was watching, he threw it into the fire. Then Teddy spun around and walked quickly off. Preston was still saying something to Hillary, but she wasn't paying attention to the conversation anymore. Preston sighed. He didn't know what it was about this woman that fascinated him so much. Her mind was a labyrinth. He couldn't understand her, no matter how hard he tried. Maybe that was what drew him to her. As she said, she was drawn to puzzles, and once she had one piece, she wanted the next. Preston felt the same way about Hillary. As soon as he figured out one part of who she was, he wanted to find out more. Hillary wasn't thinking any romantic thoughts at the moment. She had to find out what Teddy had thrown into the fire and why. She had to break away from the conversation with Preston without being rude, but the packet was going to burn if she didn't do something about it. And fast. Excuse me for a moment, Preston, Hillary said and ran toward the spot where Teddy had stood. Her promise to stay out of the investigation was immediately forgotten, as she couldn't let potential evidence burn. It went against her grain and her curiosity, and she was dying to find out what it was. Hillary used her marshmallow stick and got as close to the fire as she dared, scraping the packet toward her. No one else was this close, and she had to work fast not to get burned or to lose the packet. It had already caught fire, and Hillary was sure they were letters now that she was closer. She was frantic to save them, before they were ruined completely. If Teddy had wanted to burn them, they had to be important. And if they were important, Hillary wanted to know what they were about. Preston had run after her and grabbed her by the arm. Hillary moved back. "You're going to burn yourself," he said. Hillary paid no attention to him, pulling her arm free of Preston's grip to save the letters. She was determined not to let them burn, not to let Teddy get away with whatever he was hiding. If anything, his terrible behavior was reason enough to want to find out what was written in those letters. "Hillary, what are you doing?" Preston asked. "I just need to get this," Hillary said, and scraped the letters close enough that she could grab them out of the fire. She tossed the burning parcel to the side, and Preston stomped on it, putting out the flames. When the fire was out, he stood with his hands on his hips, looking down at the smoldering pile of letters. "What is this? Did you accidentally drop something in the fire?" he asked. Hillary was grateful that Preston had acted so quickly before asking questions. She kneeled down and carefully picked up the packet. It was damaged around the edges with a nasty singe in the middle, but she was sure it could be salvaged. She desperately wanted to know what was written in these letters. The envelopes were all blank. Teddy Trundle just walked up to the bonfire and threw it into the flames. "I want to know what it is and why he needed to burn it." Preston shook his head. This woman wouldn't stop, would she? She had only moments ago promised him she would stay out of it, and now she had done this. But he had to admit that the packet would have gone unnoticed and burned if it wasn't for her. "All right," Preston sighed. "Let's have a look." Hillary held the packet lightly in her hands, and Preston saw that they were letters. The envelopes were singed or burned here and there, but mostly intact. There had to be documents in them. Why would Teddy come to a bonfire in a public place to burn them rather than at home? It led Preston to believe that the letters were important, something Teddy hoped wouldn't be traced back to him. Preston had very little respect for the man. There had been so many rumors about his infidelity, some of them confirmed. Preston believed them all to be true, and unless he had to, he tried to avoid speaking to the man. Hillary walked away from the fire, and Preston followed her. She found a park bench that was out of the way of the milling crowds and chatter and laughter. Preston sat down next to her, and together they opened the first letter. "Dear Carolina, from the moment I laid eyes on you, I knew I had to have you. Your amazing smile and bright eyes drew me the way no woman ever has." "Oh my," Hillary said as she read the letter. Preston read it with her and made sounds of surprise too. One by one, they worked through the letters. They were all addressed to Carolina and became progressively more sultry and sexual in nature. It was clear that Carolina and Teddy had had an intimate relationship on paper as well as in person. The last few letters, however, had a different tone. They were still addressed to Carolina, but were filled with hate and anger. "Do you see this?" Hillary said, pointing out a passage in one of the last letters. "I rue the day we met. I regret ever taking you into my heart. I want the bracelet with your name on it that I gave you. You don't deserve something that expensive. I don't need to tell you what will happen if you don't get out of this town." "That looks like a threat to me," Preston said. "But if these letters are for Carolina, how did Teddy have them?" He thought for a moment. "I'm guessing he probably had a key to Carolina's apartment and took the letters either before or after she was murdered." Hillary nodded in agreement, and they kept reading. The last two letters were full of threats that were similar to the one she'd pointed out. It was clear that their relationship had started well, but had slowly become toxic. Judging by these dates, they were involved for a lot longer than anyone thought, Hillary said. Naomi had found Carolina in bed with Teddy 2 weeks ago, but there were letters that suggested they had been seeing each other for months. It had been a full-blown affair from the looks of things. "This is dated just before she died," Hillary said, pointing to the date on the last letter. "And it's full of threats." Preston nodded. "You're right." He looked up, searching the crowd. It doesn't look good for Teddy. Preston had to question Teddy. The letters implied that he'd wished harm on Carolina, and now that she had died, Preston needed to know if Teddy had been involved, as the letters suggested. Preston spotted him in the crowd talking and laughing with a group of people. "If you'll excuse me," Preston said and got up. "I have to find Teddy and bring him in for questioning." Hillary nodded. "Of course. I can't believe we found this." She handed the letters to Preston. They were evidence, and he needed them to be able to arrest Teddy. "Go home, Hillary," Preston said. "This is official police business, and I'm afraid you can't be involved further." Hillary's heart sank. She had been on an adrenaline high, going through those letters and finding another piece to the puzzle. She didn't want to go home, she wanted to be there when Preston found Teddy. She wanted to see the look on his face when he was arrested for murder in front of all these people. But Preston was right, she shouldn't be involved. And anyway, maybe it was better if she left. Her disdain for Teddy had no place in this case. "All right," she finally said. "But call me in the morning, okay?" Preston smiled and nodded. He knew that Hillary wanted him to call so she could find out what happened with Teddy, but he'd take what he could get. "I'll speak to you tomorrow," he said. Preston watched Hillary leave, following her with his eyes all the way to her car. It wasn't that he didn't trust her, it was partly because he wanted to see her leave safely, but he wasn't sure she would leave. He half expected her to walk to her car for a while, and then find another reason to be involved with the crime. She had a knack for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Preston looked at the letters she had given him. Maybe instead, Hillary had a knack for being in the right place at the right time. Whatever the case, Preston had a suspect in a murder investigation to catch, and he couldn't afford to stand there dreaming about a woman when justice had to be served. He put the letters in his jacket pocket and turned toward the bonfire. Teddy was still standing in the group, talking and laughing, as if he hadn't only minutes ago tried to burn letters that implicated him in a crime. Preston walked through the crowd, smiling and nodding at everyone who greeted him. Teddy looked up, and their eyes met. "Evening, Chief," he said with a smile. "Teddy," Preston said, smiling too. "Can I have a word with you?" Teddy frowned. "In private," Preston added. He had the dignity to do it away from all the people. There was more than enough gossip going around without him making a scene. Teddy nodded and followed Preston away from the crowds. "What is it?" he asked when they were far enough away from the people and the fire that they were partly shrouded in darkness. "You're under arrest for the murder of Karolina Mikhailovsky," Preston said. Chapter 7. "You can't tell anyone I told you," Hillary said to Annabelle while they drove through the streets of Rosemary Harbor. "Not even Rose." "Especially not Rose," Annabelle said. Hillary smirked. "Yes, especially." She told Annabelle about what happened the night before when she salvaged the letters from the fire with Preston. Annabelle agreed that Teddy was a scumbag. He must have been very good at keeping secrets, if he was able to see her that long without anyone knowing. "It's hard to hide anything around here," Annabelle said. Hillary agreed. Teddy had an apparent knack for playing his cards close to his chest. She was curious about the investigation, about his arrest. The rumors that Preston had taken him in for questioning hadn't come out yet. Preston must have been very discreet. Unless Teddy had given him the slip. But Hillary was sure Preston had gotten him. She desperately wanted to call and find out what had happened. Her curiosity was killing her. But he said he would call her, and she would wait until he did. She didn't want to repeat the conversation of the day before, when Preston realized that she was only calling to find out about the case. She didn't want to make him feel used again. Especially not after she had confessed to him that she was interested in him, despite her struggle to let go of her past with Matthew. Spot squawked. He had come along for the deliveries, having slipped out of the shop again. Now he flapped his wings, and before either of the women could stop him, flew out the van's window. What is he doing now? Annabelle asked. I wish I knew. But I've learned he always comes back, Hillary said, and they drove on. So, how was it with Preston then? Annabelle asked. She was a little bitter that her mom had gone out with the police chief again. It was obvious he liked Hillary, and Annabelle couldn't see the point of Hillary leading him on if she wasn't going to date him. We had a good time, thank you, Hillary said tightly. She didn't like talking to her daughter about her friendship with Preston. Annabelle got upset about it easily, and Hillary was tired of feeling like she had to defend herself. When they stopped at their first delivery address, Spot returned. He landed on Annabelle's shoulder with bits of almond on his beak. You sly bird, Annabelle said. Where do you keep finding almonds? Hopefully not in Naomi's shop, Hillary said. Here, help me with this. The two women delivered their baskets before getting into the van and driving on to the next destination. Spot flew out the window as before. Every time they stopped, Spot found them, and every time he had more almond bits on his beak. That's a lot of almonds, Hillary pointed out. I hope he doesn't make himself sick. Annabelle inspected the parrot. At this rate, I'm starting to believe that maybe Spot could eat 10 gallons of the stuff, she joked. Annabelle found Spot's naughty streak amusing. Others got upset about it, but it reminded Annabelle of her father. Matthew had had a naughty streak like that too. He would never cause harm, but he would play little tricks for everyone's amusement. Hillary didn't seem amused. She looked worried. I hope he's not stealing it, she said. Spot flew away again. When he returned another time, he had an almond in his beak. He's getting it from somewhere close by, Annabelle said. He's never gone long. Hillary nodded and fought with Spot to get the unsalted almond out of his beak. When she got it free, she turned the piece over in her hand. Spot, where did you find all these almonds? She asked. Playhouse, Spot squawked, and Hillary was relieved. At least this time the answer wasn't dead body. It could be worse, she said to Annabelle. But we have to get to the bottom of this. What about our deliveries? Annabelle asked, a little annoyed. Every time Annabelle's mom went on a limb, Annabelle was the one who had to pick up the slack. She felt it was a little unfair. That can wait, Hillary said. Annabelle fought the urge to roll her eyes at her mom. She considered telling her mom to figure out this mystery on her own, while Annabelle continued with the deliveries. Come with me, Hillary said to Annabelle as if she knew what her daughter was thinking. Annabelle sighed and finally agreed. Show me, Hillary said to Spot. Not on your life, Buster, Spot said. Hillary gasped. What? I ain't talkin', Spot quoted, and Hillary shook her head. Annabelle smiled. The parrot was full of mischief today. It's not funny, Hillary said when she saw Annabelle's amusement. I want to know where it came from. Annabelle's smile faded. Really? She asked. Hillary nodded. It wasn't a game. She wasn't running around like a fool, as Annabelle seemed to think. There really was a murderer out there, and this was a clue. But Spot was being a pain and wouldn't say where he got the almonds, and there was nothing that could be done about it right now. We'll have to carry on with our deliveries, Hillary said. Annabelle held Spot, stopping him from flying away again, and they got into the van and closed the windows. Where to next? Hillary asked Annabelle, who had the clipboard with addresses in the passenger door. Marion Murdoch, 5 Seal Drive, she said. Hillary nodded and put the van into gear. They drove the short distance to Seal Drive and found Marion's house with ease. The mailbox read Murdoch, and the house was one of the bigger houses in town. I'm running in with this, Hillary said, taking the 2 gift baskets Marion had ordered extra from the back. Hillary hoped Marion had the payment for both these and the ones she'd picked up the other day and hadn't paid for. She wasn't sure what she would do if she didn't. She walked up the front path while Annabelle waited in the van. There was no answer at the front door, but Hillary heard children laughing and playing outside in the back. She walked around to the back of the house and found 3 kids in the yard. They were playing on the grass, the two older boys kicking a ball and a younger girl on the swing. They were all primary school age. Spot squawked and flew toward Hillary, landing on her shoulder. Annabelle must have let him out of the van. "Hello, kids," Hillary called, and they stopped playing to look at her. "I know that parrot," the girl said, hopping off the swing. "Do you?" Hillary asked. The girl nodded. "He comes to say hello sometimes. He was here just now." "Oh," Hillary said. "Hello, hello," Spot said, and the girl laughed. "Hello, pretty bird," she said. Hillary smiled. "His name is Spot. Do you want to pet him?" The girl nodded and reached for Spot, but the bird flew up with a squawk and flew into what looked like a fairly good-sized playhouse. "He likes it there," the girl said. "He keeps coming back to the playhouse. I like it in there too, but it's hot today. It's good to play outside when it's hot." "It's cooler out here," Hillary said. "Is your mom home?" "No," the girl said. "She went shopping for a while. Randy is in charge." She pointed at her older brother, who had resumed kicking the ball with the other boy. "I have a delivery for her," Hillary said, holding up the baskets. "Will you tell her I came by and give them to her? She'd just have to come back later and get the payment." The girl looked at Randy, who was ignoring Hillary's presence. "I think so," she said. "Thanks, you're a sweetheart," Hillary said, smiling. She loved children. She had only had Annabelle due to complications, but now that her daughter was all grown up, Hillary sometimes found that she missed having younger children around the house. A moment later, Spot returned. He had a piece of almond in his beak. Hillary frowned, taking it from Spot. "Do you have a bag of nuts in your playhouse?" she asked. The girl nodded. "It's very expensive," Hillary pointed out. "Is it a good idea to have it in there?" "We're hiding it," the girl said. "Shush, Danielle," Randy said. He looked at Hillary with big eyes. "Mom isn't supposed to know," he added. He came to Hillary, the younger boy following. Hillary nodded slowly. She didn't want to scare the kids off, letting them think they were in trouble, but she wanted to know how they had gotten their hands on it. It wasn't just any nuts, and if it was the nuts that had killed Carolina, Preston and the police department had to know about it. "Where did you get them?" Hillary asked, smiling at Randy. Randy looked at his brother as if deciding if he should tell Hillary. "She was throwing it away," Randy said eventually. "We didn't think it was wrong to take it because she was getting rid of it. She accidentally ran over it, so she couldn't use it anyway. It was supposed to be for a fundraiser at school, and she set it on the driveway right behind the car while she ran back inside for her phone. Then she forgot it was there and ran over it. It's still okay to eat, just not good enough for the fundraiser because it got messed up. We keep it in the playhouse because Mommy never goes in there," Danielle said. "Shush, Donnie," Randy scolded again. The little sister was talking a lot, telling Hillary what she wanted to know. Kids were so innocent and open about everything. Grown-ups lost it somewhere along the way. "We're just eating it, not doing anything wrong," Danielle said, defensive. "And I like her." She smiled at Hillary. "Do you want some?" "Spot really likes it." "I can see that. He's been bringing me some all morning." Randy frowned. "How does a parrot crave nuts so much?" Hillary laughed, shaking her head. "I don't know. He's a crazy parrot. He's been silly since we got him years ago." The kids crowded around Spot and petted him, talking excitedly. Spot sat quietly, as if he enjoyed the attention. Hillary knew Spot could easily get in a bad mood and get snappy. Maybe the almonds had put him in a good mood. With how much he'd eaten, Hillary hoped so. The kids asked questions about Spot, and Hillary answered them, explaining what she knew about parrots. "What are you guys doing?" Marian asked, coming out of the house. "Oh, Hillary," she added when she saw Hillary. Hillary stood up. The kids stood back as if they had done something wrong. "I came to deliver your baskets and we're talking about Spot," Hillary said, noting how subdued the kids looked. Marian walked toward her with a tight smile. She wore a dress suit and kitten heels, as if she had come from the office. "Thank you," Marian said. "I guess I'll have to write you a check then. I'd ask you to stay, but I'm afraid I have things to do." Hillary smiled politely. "No, that's fine, I have more deliveries to take care of." Marian went inside to get the check, and Hillary smiled at the kids while they tried to get Spot to say things. Marian returned with the check and handed it to Hillary. "I really don't know why I bought so many baskets. But it's for the fundraiser and the other parents were buying them, and I couldn't very well." She paused, then said, "And of course it's good of you to give a portion of the sales back to the school." Hillary smiled. "Of course. Anything to support our town." Marian nodded. Then she headed back inside after telling Hillary goodbye. Danielle and her youngest brother followed her, but Randy ran after Hillary and caught up with her at the front of the house. "Please don't say anything about the nuts," he said. "I don't want my mom to find out." Hillary frowned. "It's never a good idea to hide something from your mom," she said. Randy nodded, looking over his shoulder at the house. "I know. But she can't pay for it, so I don't want her to know you found out about it. She'll be embarrassed." Hillary thought back to when Marian's card declined. It all made sense now, and she wondered if Marian's check would clear. But she'd deal with that later. She nodded at Randy, proud of the boy for trying to protect his mom. The kids had taken the nuts because they were kids and loved it. But Randy was being kind by not wanting the news to spread that Marian was having financial difficulties. It took a lot of heart to look out for others at such a young age. "I understand," Hillary said. "And that's very noble of you. Putting someone else first is a great thing to do." Randy twisted his toe in the grass. "I don't think it's very noble if we're lying to her about them in the playhouse." Hillary thought about it. "Well, I think it's noble of you to protect your mom. And you don't have to worry, your secret is safe with me." Randy flashed Hillary a big, toothy smile before he ran back to the house to join his brother and sister inside. Hillary carried on toward the van, thinking that good people were born, not made. When she reached the van, Spot flew off again. She was worried he would head to the playhouse, but instead, he flew in the direction of the store. Wherever he went, as long as he didn't get Hillary in trouble, she was okay with it. "I don't know what's with that parrot today," Annabelle said. She'd also seen Spot take off again. "I wonder if he's bored." "Maybe he is," Hillary said and laughed. Annabelle shook her head, but she was smiling. Spot was full of mischief, but he didn't do harm when he acted out. "That's our last delivery for the day," Hillary said. "Let's stop for coffee before we head back to the shop." Annabelle agreed and they drove into town, where they stopped at Corner Coffee for a cup of coffee and bagels. They got 3 of each to take with them back to Rose, who had been manning the shop alone all day. "I wish we knew where Spot is getting all that almonds from," Annabelle said when they got back into the van with their loot. "Do you think he's stealing it from Naomi again?" Hillary shook her head. "I don't think he stole it from her in the first place," she said firmly. She didn't add that she knew where he was getting them from. She had promised Randy she wouldn't tell his secret, and if she started with the story, she would have to tell it all. She couldn't tell only a part of it and leave the rest out. And if Hillary was anything, she was a woman of her word. It pained her to know that Marian was struggling with money and didn't feel the liberty to reach out. The woman was very proud. Once upon a time, Hillary would have scoffed at the thought, but after she'd seen Matthew suffer, she had started to understand that people wanted to save their dignity. If Marian thought it would hurt her to ask for help, Hillary wouldn't think less of her for it. Instead, she thought, she would do something to help. A lot of people around town were willing to spread rumors, but imagine what Rosemary Harbor would be like if they spread kindness as often as they spread gossip. Hillary decided that she would do something to help Marian out. If she could give her the nuts she needed, it would be a good thing. But Hillary didn't want recognition for it. She only wanted to help for the sake of helping, not for the sake of being a hero. On the way to something special, Annabelle pointed. "Isn't that Teddy?" she asked. Hillary looked, and sure enough, there was Teddy strolling down the road, a free man. It irritated her that he wasn't in jail. She felt bad that she'd hoped he was a murderer so he could be punished for cheating, but the thought had shot through her mind a few times. She was glad that he wasn't, now that she saw him on the street, but it was a pity he wouldn't be punished for being unfaithful. But if Teddy hadn't done it, and Naomi was in the clear, who had the motivation to kill Carolina? There I go again, Hillary thought, scolding herself for thinking about the investigation when it wasn't her problem. Preston had asked her to stay out of it, and he had never called her to fill her in on Teddy's questioning. Maybe she should do what he'd asked and let it all go. She could turn her attention away from the case and focus on doing something good in the community, rather than condemning everyone based on loose facts. She wasn't a detective, after all. She was a curious, middle-aged woman. Nothing more. "I think it's terrible what he's done to Naomi," Annabelle said. Hillary nodded. "I think so too. You and Daddy set such a good example for me," Annabelle said. "Your marriage was amazing, and I know what I should look out for one day when I find the right guy." Hillary smiled, reaching for her daughter's hand and giving it a squeeze. It made her feel good that Annabelle thought so. She had had a wonderful marriage with Matthew, and she was glad that Annabelle felt like she could have the same one day. She hoped it would come for her daughter sooner rather than later, but she also wanted Annabelle to take her time until she was sure. After all, choosing someone to spend a lifetime with wasn't easy, and as she had noticed lately, it was a lot harder to come by. She had been lucky to meet Matthew. It seemed there were so few good men around these days. Chapter 8. When Hillary and Annabelle returned to the shop, Spot was on his perch like he'd never left. Hillary shook her head. The parrot was proving to be a nuisance today. She hoped he would get over it soon. After taking care of everything she needed to do in the shop, Hillary headed over to Sticky Sweet. She wanted to make up with Naomi. They had had their differences lately, but now, knowing what the woman had gone through with a cheating husband, she wanted to be friends again. The fewer enemies Naomi had right then, the better. When she walked into the shop, it was empty of customers. Naomi was behind the counter, flipping through a chocolatier magazine. She looked up when Hillary came in, but she didn't smile. "How can I help you?" Naomi asked when Hillary walked to the counter. "Firstly, I want to say I'm sorry," Hillary said. "For what?" Naomi asked. "For being difficult when you were trying to find out who stole your nuts. For coming in here telling you how you should act with Teddy. I could have handled it better, and I should have stayed out of your business." Naomi's face changed. She wasn't on the defense anymore, and she sighed. "No, I understand why you acted the way you did. I was very accusing, and I know Spot means more to you than just any old bird. And you are right about Teddy. It's a longer story than you know, and I have it under control. I'm leaving him." Hillary was surprised at how calm Naomi sounded as she said it. "I'm still sorry," she said. Naomi nodded. "Apology accepted. And I'm sorry too." Hillary and Naomi exchanged kind smiles, and it was over. "Now, for the second reason I'm here. I want to order a batch of chocolate bars and custom packaged nuts from you." "Oh," Naomi said, looking surprised. "Your baskets are doing well." Hillary nodded. They were doing well, but it wasn't why she was ordering the nuts. She intended to fill Marion's order. She wanted to pay for the nuts, since Marion couldn't, and deliver it to her, without anyone knowing who had done it. Hillary didn't want credit. She merely wanted to be a good Samaritan. There had been too much negativity around town lately, and Hillary wanted to make up for it by doing something good. Naomi took the order, writing down the details. "As luck would have it, I'm making some bars now, so you can pick up your order a bit later today," she said. Oh, that's wonderful, Hillary said. She'd thought she would have to wait. Thank you. Naomi nodded, smiling. Thank you for coming in, she said. It's the best place to order chocolate from, Hillary said. Naomi shook her head. I wasn't referring to the chocolate. I know, Hillary said warmly. She paid for the order and headed out of Sticky Sweet, feeling for the first time since the nuts had disappeared that she'd done the right thing. When Hillary returned to something special, chaos reigned. Spot was squawking and flying around like a mad bird, pushing things over and wildly flapping his wings. I don't know what's gotten into him, Annabelle said, trying to catch Spot. Rose was in a corner, shouting profanities at the bird. I think it's all the almonds, Hillary said. It can't be good for him. Maybe he's on a high. Hillary whistled and Spot flew to her. His claws were open and he squawked terribly. For a moment, Hillary was worried the bird would harm her. But he landed on her shoulder with a pinch and ruffled his feathers. I think you and I need to go out for a walk, she said. Annabelle and Rose looked relieved. Hillary went into the back and put a ring on Spot's leg that was attached to a thin leash. She walked outside. The moment they were outside, Spot tried to fly away, but found he couldn't with Hillary holding the leash. It was absurd having to walk your parrot like an airborne dog, but Hillary couldn't think of any other way to get rid of the bird's energy. It took some tugging and pulling, but as soon as Spot realized he couldn't get away, he settled for flying with Hillary as she walked, circling above her, burning the energy that was driving him mad. On the way, Preston found Hillary and parked his police car. When he got out, he barked a laugh. Are you walking the parrot? Hillary nodded, a little embarrassed. He's on an almond high, she said. Preston shook his head, still chuckling. Would you mind if I walked with you? He asked. I need to bounce my thoughts off someone, and you're the only civilian I can talk to about the case without worrying that it will spread around town. Hillary might have worried about people seeing them walking together and getting the wrong idea, but her curiosity about the case won out, and she agreed. Preston walked next to her and told her about Teddy and how he had a solid alibi. He thought out loud more than asked Hillary for advice, but even so, Hillary found out very little she didn't know. Preston was being tight-lipped about the information on the case. So what now? Hillary asked. Who's next? That's the thing, Preston said, sounding defeated. I don't know. I have no idea where to go from here. I'm missing something, but I don't know what it is. Hillary nodded, and they walked in silence for a while. It sounded like the case was at a standstill. It was a shame. Hillary had hoped that Carolina's death would be avenged somehow, that the murderer would be found and brought to justice. She had been young, and it was never right that someone's life was taken by another. Well, I guess I'll get back to the office, Preston said when they reached the end of the road and walked back again. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Not at all, Hillary said. Thank you for walking my bird with me. Preston laughed and got into his car, shaking his head. When Hillary returned to the shop, Spot had calmed down enough to sit on his perch and not bother anyone. Thank goodness you took care of him, Rose said. That bird is the bane of my existence. Nothing a little exercise can't fix, Hillary said. Rose nodded, but Hillary could tell she was still unhappy. The parrot had caused a lot of trouble lately, and Rose wasn't enjoying it anymore. Hillary hoped Spot would settle down now, or she would lock him in his cage early for the night. You got a call, Rose said. From Sticky Sweet. Naomi said you could stop by for your order. Oh, thank you, Hillary said. What was it for? Rose asked. Hillary pulled up one shoulder. I'm making sure all our stock is up to date, that's all. Rose nodded, looking suspicious, but she wasn't going to get anything else out of Hillary. Hillary left the shop and walked back to Sticky Sweet where she picked up the chocolate and nuts, then drove to the primary school. The school was quiet, but the receptionist and secretaries were all in the office. Hello, Roxanne, Hillary greeted the receptionist. I have a delivery from Marian Murdoch, in my van. Oh, Roxanne said, glancing at Hillary over her glasses. Marian didn't tell me to expect anything. Maybe it slipped her mind, Hillary said. She didn't want Roxanne to know that it was an act of kindness, not a real order. What is it? Roxanne asked. The nuts for the fundraiser. They were dropped off at something special instead of the school this morning, so I thought I would save time instead of getting the courier to run them over. Roxanne frowned, shaking her head slightly. I think there's a mistake, she said. Marian brought the last of the nuts to the school yesterday. We have the full count. Hillary was frowning too. That is strange, she said. Are you sure? Roxanne nodded. Positive. I accepted both deliveries, and I did the books for it, so I'm sure. Did you double-check the delivery sheet that it's from Marian and not maybe someone else? I thought I did. I guess I'll have to check again. Maybe it's my mistake. Hillary was starting to think that it had indeed been her mistake. She had ordered the nuts for Marian without asking anyone about it. Maybe she shouldn't have kept it all a secret. At least she could use them for her own baskets in due time. It wasn't money thrown in the water, but money that would have been spent either way. Hillary walked out to the van, puzzling over the delivery. How had that happened? Surely she couldn't have misunderstood. But no, Randy had told her that morning that Marian didn't have the money to buy more nuts. Children rarely missed something, they saw and heard everything. So, how did Marian pay for them to fill the order? Unless she hadn't paid for it. Suddenly, it all fell into place for Hillary, the nuts that had gone missing from Sticky Sweet. What if Marian was the one who stole them because she couldn't afford to buy it? It wasn't impossible, although Hillary didn't think the woman was capable of theft. Still, people did things in times of need that they wouldn't do normally, and maybe Marian had been desperate. She was the type who had to keep up appearances, and not delivering the promised nuts to the school would have been unthinkable. When Hillary thought back to Marian's reaction when her card was declined, she could imagine Marian acting out. Believing that Marian might be stealing to cover up her financial difficulties made it harder for Hillary to keep Marian's secrets. How was she going to let Preston know what she suspected, without betraying that Marian was having financial difficulties? She didn't want to wound the woman's pride, and she had made a promise. But theft was wrong, and it had set Naomi back as well. Perhaps the best way to go about it was to find out if she was correct. If Hillary was going to have to break the news to Preston and expose Marian as bankrupt, then it would have to be the truth. Right then, it was speculation alone. Hillary decided that she would have to do a little more snooping of her own to discover facts. Of course, that would go against what Preston had asked of her. She would be getting involved in the investigation again. But this time, it wouldn't be out of curiosity. It would be for the sake of protecting others. Naomi's business, Marian's pride. It was a good thing to get involved if it was for a greater cause than satisfying one's own curiosity, right? If Hillary could find out what was going on and help Preston with his case, it would be a good deed too. Preston looked like he had hit a wall with his investigation, and if he couldn't put someone away for the death of Carolina, the murderer would be on the loose forever. These were all perfectly good reasons to get involved. Having made the decision to take it further, Hillary headed back to something special to lock up. While Hillary worked, she formulated her plan. She thought of how she would do it, and what she would do. She only half listened to Rose's prattling. Instead, her mind ran over her plans again and again. She would head out after dark to finish what she had started. Until then, she would go about business as usual. Chapter 9. When night fell, Hillary told Annabelle she was going to the park for a walk. Are you okay? Annabelle asked. Fine, why? Because usually we go for walks together. Annabelle looked worried. Hillary went to Annabelle and hugged her. Don't look so worried. I'm just going out to clear my head. It's been a hard week, and I need a breather. Annabelle nodded, satisfied. Hillary was glad she didn't have to explain herself. She didn't want to lie to Annabelle. What she was doing was against the law, after all. Hillary took Spot with her and took her own car to Seal Drive. She parked on the road a few houses down from Marion's house and walked the final distance. She had dressed in all black, her hair tied back into a small ponytail, and she wore her walking shoes. She felt like she looked the part. Like a cat burglar. She shook off the thought. She was merely going to walk around, maybe look in a window or two. No breaking and entering. She couldn't believe what she was about to do. Trespassing was pushing it even for her. She had snuck into the law firm that represented Jessica Danvers when she'd wanted to find more evidence about that case, but it hadn't been quite the same. She had gotten permission to be in the office, after all. Only the snooping hadn't been allowed. It was different this time. Hillary didn't have permission to go onto the Murdoch property, and especially not to sneak around in the dark of night for no good reason. Her adrenaline pumped through her veins, her heart beat loudly in her ears, and she felt the thrill of secrecy course through her body. Spot sat on her shoulder, quiet and unmoving, as if the bird, too, knew the gravity of the situation. It was a risk to bring him along the way he'd been acting out, but Hillary needed the companionship, and she was looking for evidence of stolen nuts. If anyone could find missing almonds, Spot could. So, with the parrot perched on her shoulder, Hillary slowly crept toward the Murdoch house. Hillary was sure she would be finished quickly. She would only snoop around a short while to minimize the risk of getting caught. If she would be trespassing, and that was a crime. The road was deadly quiet. The houses all had lights on, so Hillary could look in, but they wouldn't see her in her black clothes when they looked out. No dogs barked at her. No cars with blinding headlights came from the front, and Hillary made it to the Murdoch house without trouble. Thanks to her earlier delivery, Hillary knew the way around the side of the house and to the backyard, where she had noticed earlier that Marion had a couple of sheds. She doubted Marion would have kept the stolen nuts in the house. She knew Marion had delivered them to the school. But if there was indeed evidence in one of the sheds, Hillary wouldn't be able to find it unless it was visible from the window. Trespassing she could deal with, but she was not breaking and entering. When Hillary crept around the side of the house, everything looked different in the pale moonlight. The sheds were all dark and ominous, and the grass was a stretch of gray with silver beads of dew reflecting the light of the moon. The wind rustled through the leaves above Hillary, and the smell of the ocean rode the breeze. Hillary loved the smell of the sea and took a deep breath. It reminded her so much of Matthew. But she had to keep her mind on the job now. She could miss Matthew later. "This is where your help is needed, Spot," Hillary whispered, taking the parrot off her shoulder. "Find the nuts for me." She hoped the parrot wouldn't squawk like he often did, and miraculously he kept quiet. He flapped his wings and shot away from Hillary almost inaudibly. Hillary watched Spot circle over the sheds one by one, going from the playhouse where the almonds had been before to the next and the next. The children must have finished them. She was glad if that was the case, because she didn't want Spot focusing only on the playhouse. She had the feeling more nuts were in one of the sheds. She just needed to know which one. Marion had 2 different sheds in addition to the playhouse. For once, Spot's terrible almond addiction and his knack for breaking into places he didn't belong was proving useful. Spot circled from one shed to the other, looking for a trace of nuts or a place to enter. It was hard to tell which it was. Spot was a dark shadow against an inky sky. Hillary looked around, making sure she wouldn't be seen in her hiding spot. She had positioned herself between the bushes in the yard, close to a tree, and she hoped that she was invisible from all sides of the yard, including the house. It wouldn't do her any good if the neighbors saw her, but she was hidden well enough from the main house. Spot landed on the roof of the nicest-looking shed, nails scraping on the tin roof. He flapped his wings and settled down as if he was going to go to sleep. "No," Hillary whispered, hoping the parrot would hear her. He couldn't go to sleep now. She hadn't thought about the fact that Spot usually slept as soon as night fell. It had been careless of her. If that happened, she would have to leave him here. She couldn't very well climb onto the shed and retrieve him before sneaking out of the backyard again. Spot would fly home in the morning, of course. Hillary watched Spot, hoping he would change his mind. Then the parrot suddenly moved its head around as if listening for something. Hillary strained to hear, but the sound of crickets and a dog barking in the distance were all she could make out. "Nuts, Spot," Hillary whispered. "Look for nuts." Spot squawked. Hillary squeezed her eyes shut. She was worried that someone would hear it. If one of the Murdoch kids heard, they would come out and see her. Thankfully, no one came. Hillary crept across the lawn, moving closer to the shed. She was hoping she could tell Spot what to do if she was closer. She was in the middle of the lawn when Spot flew down and disappeared around the back of the shed. Hillary crept closer, trying to see where the parrot had gone. She discovered a window that faced away from the back wall of the house. It was open several inches, large enough for Spot to wiggle into, and before Hillary knew it, the parrot was inside. "Spot," Hillary whispered. "Who's your daddy?" Spot said in Matthew's voice, loud and clear, before he crept out of the shed again. He had an almond in his claw. "That's a good boy," Hillary said. She took it and broke a tiny piece off for Spot as a reward. "Put your hands in the air and turn around slowly," a loud voice barked from behind her. Hillary froze in fear. The voice registered a moment later. "Preston?" she asked carefully. She put her hands up as she'd been told and turned around. A flashlight shone brightly in her eyes and she squeezed them shut. "Hillary?" Preston asked and put the flashlight up. Hillary noticed he had a gun with a flashlight, both pointing to the sky now. She shivered. Had he pointed that at her? "What the hell are you doing here?" Preston asked. Hillary walked closer to Preston. Now that he knew who she was, she knew he wouldn't point the gun at her. When she approached, he holstered it and clicked off the flashlight. Hillary held up the almond. "Evidence," she said. "How did you find me?" Preston sighed. "You might be great at deductive reasoning, but you're a terrible thief. One of the neighbors saw you and called in an intruder." "I'm not a thief," Hillary protested, but she felt silly. She'd thought she had done so well, wearing black clothes, sticking to the bushes and sneaking around from shadow to shadow. Turned out she'd only been fooling herself. Spot flew to them and perched on Hillary's shoulder. "Take me, officer, I surrender," Spot said. "Does Marion know I'm in her yard?" Hillary asked, ignoring the parrot. Preston shook his head. "I wasn't going to alarm her until I checked it out. But you should leave. Now. This is trespassing, you know." Hillary nodded. "I'll walk you out," Preston said. Hillary was sure he meant escort, so that she wouldn't do something else, but she let it slide and together they walked out of the backyard. Once they were on the road, far enough away from the house that Hillary could relax and Preston stopped looking so uptight, he turned to Hillary. "This has got to stop," he said. "This isn't the first time you've sneaked into places you don't belong." He was referring to the law offices Hillary had snuck into. "But it solved the case that time," Hillary replied. Preston had to agree. It had solved the case. But he was irritated with her. He liked Hillary and he didn't want to get her into trouble, but if she kept doing things that were against the law for the sake of her own curiosity, he couldn't keep letting it slide. He was still an officer of the law, and Hillary was pushing the limits. "Why are you so set on being involved in every big case I have?" he asked. "This is only the second one," Hillary said, hoping she sounded offended. "It is, but where will it stop?" Preston asked. "How do I know you're not going to keep doing these things? What if it wasn't me, but another officer that had been dispatched tonight? The only reason I came was because of the murder case." Hillary shrugged. "If it hadn't been for the murder case, I wouldn't have been here." She had him there, and Preston had nothing to say in return. Just stay out of the way, okay? He finally said. But I have evidence, Hillary said again. This time Preston paid attention. What are you talking about? He asked. Hillary held the almond out, and Preston took it. Where did you find this? He asked. It's a murder weapon, right? Hillary asked. Preston shook his head. It's a little dramatic to call it that, but I guess so. Where did you find it? Hillary smiled, pleased with herself. Spot found it in Marian's shed. I suspect she stole it from Sticky Sweet and Carolina ate it. Preston thought about it for a moment. I'm going to look, Preston said. Now? Hillary asked. Preston nodded and started toward Marian's house. He had been called in about a trespasser. He would use the call and search the shed to see if he could find more evidence. Everything Hillary said made a lot of sense, but he couldn't prove it, and without it, there was no case. Still, he had a hunch that Hillary had just solved his case for him. Again. Hillary followed Preston, but he didn't seem to mind. She wasn't officially part of the case, but he wasn't telling her to stay away, and she was as curious as he was about what was in the shed. Preston crossed the lawn and opened the shed. The door hadn't been locked. He clicked on the light. Broken glass was scattered on the floor, the stem of a wine glass still intact. Everything else was perfectly in place. He walked to the counter, finding one bar of chocolate there. He opened up the cabinet above and removed a container. He opened it and found several more pieces of chocolate and nuts. Hillary entered the shed. Hillary, he started, ready to tell her to go and wait outside. Hillary frowned and kneeled, picking up something silver from the floor. She studied it before holding it out to Preston. He took it from her and inspected it. It was a tiny silver bracelet with Carolina's name on it. Well, I think this covers it, Preston said, closing his fingers around the bracelet. He knew what he had to do. Preston marched across the lawn and around the house to the front door. He knocked 3 times, loud and clear. Marian opened the door with a smile, but it faded when she saw Preston. Evening, Chief Davis. What brings you here? Nothing serious, I hope. Preston took a deep breath. He hated doing this, arresting people, but it had to be done. I'm sorry to do this, Marian, but you are under arrest for the murder of Karolina Mikhailovsky, he said. Marian looked horrified. On what grounds? Preston held out the chocolate, nuts, and the bracelet. These were found on your property, Mrs. Murdoch. If you come quietly, there is no need for everyone to know. Marian stared at the evidence, and it was plain to see that she was caught. While Preston read her rights, she blinked at him as if she was considering a denial or even making a run for it. Then she suddenly deflated. What will happen to my children? She asked. We will ensure they are safe, Preston said. But you have to come with me now. I'll make sure they're all right for tonight, Hillary offered, stepping forward. Marian looked terrified, tears welling in her eyes. She nodded and Hillary stepped into the house. Preston escorted Marian away, allowing her the dignity of not being cuffed. She wouldn't run, he knew. She had been caught. The next day, Preston walked to something special. Hillary, Annabelle, and Rose stood together, talking. Preston was willing to guess what the topic of conversation was. I've come to let you know how it all fits together, Preston said. You deserve that much. Hillary smiled at him. Preston understood her curiosity and that she needed all the ends tied up, the last pieces to her puzzle. Marian did indeed steal nuts from Sticky Sweet after she ran over her packages. She didn't have the money to replace them, and my guess is she was too proud to ask. Hillary nodded. It was a big thing for her, I know. Preston carried on. It was Sticky Sweet's chocolate and nuts. Naomi confirmed it for me. How did Carolina know Marian even had chocolate? Annabelle asked. That's where it gets interesting, Preston said. Marian asked Carolina to help her with the molds, pressuring her into doing it and keeping it secret. She knew Carolina needed the money to go to Russia with her friend Maria. Teddy had promised to pay Carolina's fare, but when Naomi caught them and they split up, he refused to give her the money. Carolina really wanted to go to Russia and wasn't about to turn down the job. But Marion didn't have money either, Hillary said. Preston shrugged. She conveniently didn't tell Carolina that until the molded chocolate was already made. She claims Carolina came back to eat it as a reward because she hadn't been paid. But if Carolina was allergic to nuts, then her death was an accident, Hillary said. Marion isn't guilty of murder. Preston sighed. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Marion finally admitted she saw Carolina steal the shed key from the house. She knew Carolina was probably going to take some of the chocolate since Marion refused to pay her. Apparently, after Carolina made the chocolate bars, there was a little chocolate left over. Marion knew Carolina was allergic to nuts, so she made a small batch of bars with ground-up almonds. Turns out Marion really hated Carolina. She blames the girl for her husband leaving her. Her husband and Carolina apparently had an affair. I guess it's no surprise she shows no remorse over the girl's death. Hillary sighed, overcome with sadness. Marion may not have actually committed the murder, but she was still responsible for Carolina's death. She really couldn't blame Marion for being furious at Carolina, but killing her was taking things too far. She felt terrible for Marion's kids. How did Marion steal this stuff at Sticky Sweet? Hillary asked, the thought striking her. There was no evidence of a break-in. Naomi kicked Teddy out for cheating on him. He was caught texting Carolina after Naomi had decided to forgive him his transgressions, and she finally snapped. Teddy and Marion have been old friends since grade school, and he asked her to let him stay with her until he worked something else out. In return, she asked him to let her borrow the key to Sticky Sweet. That way, it wouldn't be breaking and entering. Incidentally, that's how Marion knew Carolina needed money for her trip. Teddy told Marion he wasn't paying for it anymore. And Carolina knew how to do chocolate molding because she worked for Naomi for a while, Rose reminded them. She had been quiet until now, but she had that bit of extra information, and everything fell into place. Preston looked at Hillary. She was a one-of-a-kind woman, a civilian with a crazy parrot, and somehow the pair had managed to help him solve another murder case. So ladies, I'm off. I have to prepare the evidence for trial. Have a lovely day, and may it be boring without the thrill of murder and revenge. The three women said their goodbyes, and Preston was off. At the door he stopped to give Spot an unsalted almond. The bird was a little hero, after all. Thanks for listening to S'more Event, Book 2 from Rosemary Harbor Cozy Mystery Series. Written by Wendy Meadows, read for you by Michelle, the AI narrator. For more information on Wendy's available books, visit www.wendymeadows.com.